The happy life of a fun seeker in Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 226 The Gun Shop Attacked. The quarrel between the uncle and nephew was finally settled by Pepper Potts, who returned home. The two sides signed a non-aggression pact, handing over their grievances to the victim. After all, it was impossible not to return them. Tony was truly exhausted, and who knew how Pepper Potts would react upon returning home to see a bunny man, looking exhausted and performing a ridiculous dance. Not to mention Sherlock, who looked like he'd just returned from a trip to Thailand. Anyway, the uncle and nephew didn't dare to provoke Pepper Potts at this moment. They both agreed that the only mistake was the name, not the nickname. If the quarrel continued, Pepper Potts might have changed her name to Little Tiger. Fortunately, by the next night, Sherlock had returned to his normal appearance, no longer burdened by the 2 lumps of fat on his chest, and he was incredibly happy. Of course, since he was already at Tony's house, Sherlock wasn't going to sit around doing nothing. Most importantly, he upgraded his equipment. Thanks to the Philosopher's Stone discovered within S.H.I.E.L.D., those goblin creations Sherlock once only drooled over from vending machines can now be redeemed effortlessly. This latest update to Sherlock is truly epic. First and foremost, Sherlock can now transform with a simple tug of clothing or other gadgets, similar to Doctor Strange, without the need for a lanyard. Of course, the most significant upgrade is his helmet. Sherlock has ditched his cyberpunk-inspired helmet for a pair of glasses that integrate all the helmet's functions. Crucially, these glasses are the perfect fusion of magic and technology, retaining all the helmet's technological attributes while also blurring the wearer's face. Crucially, this blurring of features is determined by the user's familiarity with Sherlock. For example, Tony sees Sherlock as just Sherlock with glasses, while Pepper Potts gives off a more subtle vibe, like Superman with glasses impersonating Clark. To put it simply, his demeanor and facial features have changed significantly, but it's still recognizable as Sherlock. Sherlock had experimented with complete strangers, and all they saw was a shimmering golden eye within a constantly emanating black mist, much like the Headless Horseman in the movies. Combined with Sherlock's elegant suit, with its dark gold outlines and overcoat, he looked both mysterious and slightly oppressive, a look that Sherlock himself was quite pleased with. Even the most amazing thing was that even the photos looked the same. Those familiar with Sherlock saw his original form, while those unfamiliar with him saw him enveloped in a black mist, which made Tony realize how unscientific this thing really was. Well, it's certainly unscientific, but it's also quite magical, isn't it? Tony had also updated some of the parameters of the Mark 42 suit, so at least Sherlock wouldn't be beaten by the suit like he was. The only thing to be careful about was the fatal blow. After all, even the smallest force could easily turn into cooked shrimp if used incorrectly. Tony even learned a little bit about magic runes from Sherlock while he was modifying his helmet. At least they wouldn't have the same disposable Avengers armor. Tony was already considering using this technology for the next generation of armor. Of course, the price he paid was a thorough modification of Sherlock's car. This time, it wasn't just resistant to the Bifrost. It was even boasted to be able to withstand a single round from an RPG. In short, Sherlock and Tony were both very pleased. To celebrate their gains, they even ordered a large amount of takeout at noon on the 3rd day. But as the saying goes, excessive joy breeds sorrow. Even at the height of one's happiness, unexpected events can often occur. Take Sherlock, for example. While he and Tony were enjoying a feast, Sherlock received a call from Price. His gun shop had been attacked. Honestly, Sherlock had never felt so angry before, not even in his life before the time travel. After crossing over, Sherlock faced a strange and dangerous world. It was his 5 uncles and the 2 little girls who provided him with the warmth of family. Though they weren't related by blood, Sherlock had long considered them the same as Tony, family. Now that his home was under attack, Sherlock was furious. Without a word, he drew his wand and attempted to operate home to find out what was going on. Fortunately, Tony had some sense and held Sherlock tightly. After much persuasion, Sherlock finally managed to suppress his anger and drove Tony to his gun shop. Even though S.H.I.E.L.D. had vanished, that didn't mean trouble was gone. Tony, who had never hidden his identity, knew that exposure would inevitably bring trouble. And Tony wasn't stupid. While everyone knew he was Iron Man, no one knew where he actually lived. Unless you were like Captain America or nutrition, either staying away from people or constantly on the move, it was difficult to avoid trouble. Did you see Black Egg and Black Widow attending hearings in Washington after their identities were exposed? Sherlock practically stomped the gas pedal all the way to the shop. A journey that usually took him half an hour or 40 minutes took Sherlock only 15 minutes to reach his shop. The two-story gun shop had largely collapsed. At the entrance, the Unit 01 and Unit 02, Tony had given Sherlock, lay frozen in place like melted candles, poised for attack. Sherlock's 5 uncles stood by with sullen faces, watching the groups of police and Forbo in and out of the wreckage. Sherlock breathed a sigh of relief after seeing his uncles were all right. But before he saw the 2 girls, Sherlock didn't dare to relax completely. He quickly approached his uncles and began to inquire. "Where are Lorna and Mindy?" Price breathed a sigh of relief at Sherlock's hastening arrival, then answered. "The 2 little girls are fine, just a little frightened. A Black Widow cashier at the front desk suffered minor injuries. Thanks to that cash register you renovated 7 years ago, there would have been deaths." Sherlock breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing no casualties, but he remained furious. He began to question Price about who had the audacity to attack. Price, upon hearing Sherlock's question, simply glanced at Tony, who stood beside Sherlock, before speaking. "I don't know, but if my guess is correct, the attack was likely directed at you, since you're Tony's nephew. In other words, it was directed at that playboy behind you, me." Tony was completely shocked by Price's words, pointing at himself in disbelief. Yes, according to the injured widow, the attacker was a black man. Upon entering, he revealed Sherlock and your identities, then blew himself up. Seeing something was amiss, Black Widow pressed the alarm and hid under the cash register, saving her life. The 2 robots protected Lorna and Mindy, who were resting in the bedroom. Miraculously, after the explosion, the man emerged from the rubble unharmed. The 2 robots gave chase, and as you saw, if the memory module hadn't burned out, it would still have retained the man's appearance. Hearing Price's words, Sherlock was stunned. In that instant, he knew who was behind the explosion. Killian. "Damn you!" Sherlock turned to confront the villain from Iron Man 3, but Price grabbed him. Hearing Sherlock's unfamiliar name, Price's expression grew serious. "Calm down, Sherlock. The underworld has its own rules. I don't care how you determined that Killian was the culprit, but we need proof and a legitimate reason. Now stand back and take your place. The training ground will be suspended for a month, and as its master, you must retaliate harshly according to our rules, not just fight alone." Hearing Price's words, Sherlock gradually calmed down, his face darkening as he stood behind him. After all, Killian was practically dead in Sherlock's eyes. Sherlock had always avoided using the unforgivable curses because both Dumbledore and Grindelwald's notebooks were filled with warnings about their destructive effects on the mind. But this time, Sherlock truly wanted to give Killian a taste of the unforgivable curses all-inclusive package. Chapter 227 Sherlock, why am I stuck in the middle? Tony had barely finished his words when he burst into a pig-like laugh. It wasn't Tony's fault, it was just too much fun. He even considered releasing this gadget to the market, offering relief to parents suffering from similarly irritated children. After all, the laws in Lighthouse and Hong Kong were similar. Spanking was strictly prohibited, lest the police and child welfare agencies intervene. While Hong Kong residents could still take their children to Shenzhen every weekend to have theirs, there was really nothing they could do in Lighthouse. Tony could even imagine how popular this gadget would be if it were made into a toy and released. Parents would then order their troubled children to wear it. Well, it might require a little tweaking. When the child wasn't doing anything wrong, it would just be a toy, with the flying parts flying slowly to minimize the impact. But if the child angered the parents, then, well, the outcome would probably be similar to Sherlock's. Sherlock, who was still lying on the ground and had not yet recovered, would never have thought of the uproar his words would cause in the future. Tony even became the most hated person among naughty children in the United States for a time, but he became the favorite person among parents. Of course, this is all a thing for the future. Sherlock doesn't know and doesn't want to know. Now Sherlock just feels that he has been beaten for no reason and has to get his place back. She obviously just wanted to have fun, so why did her mother become the fun? Sherlock couldn't understand, but not understanding would not delay Sherlock's return for revenge. While Tony was leaning on the table and smiling arrogantly, Sherlock's wand quickly appeared in Sherlock's hand. Without the slightest pause, 2 consecutive rays of light hit Tony in the next second. The next second, Tony, who was still laughing, discovered to his horror that he couldn't control his body. As if his body had a mind of its own, it started to dance funny. A simple dance would have been fine, but the most significant thing was that Tony's 2 large buck teeth began to grow wildly, reaching his chest in just a few moments. Thankfully, Sherlock retained some common sense and didn't actually use Tony's teeth as a club. Even so, the scene was hilarious enough, and this time it was Sherlock's turn to laugh. Holding onto his waist, Sherlock laughed wildly as he yanked off the visor that had just given him such a nasty blow. Watching Tony, with his long buck teeth, perform this ridiculous dance, Sherlock felt like something was missing. With another wave of his wand, a pair of long, white, furry bunny ears appeared atop Tony's head. This time it was perfect. Watching Tony, resembling a comical bunny from an anime, Sherlock's laughter widened, and he even silently raised his phone to record the scene. Tony protested desperately, but it was all in vain. How else to describe it? It was like a giant rabbit doing Luffy's chopstick in the nostril dance from One Piece, hilarious and amusing. If this image got out, Tony's Playboy Iron Man persona would crumble the next day. What? Dispel magic? Dispel that bullshit. Just let Tony, the old bastard, do it. Sherlock even calmly chose a funny tune for Tony, then, laughing, ran over to Tony's workbench and asked Jarvis to help him remove the damned armor. As for why Tony didn't object, well, Tony was actually telegraphing. But those rodent-like incisors made it impossible to hear what he was saying. As for Sherlock's impatience to remove the Mark 42 armor, it was simple, it hurt. Who could have imagined that a wizard, the most mysterious of the Avengers, would one day be beaten by a suit of armor? Sherlock said he couldn't afford to lose face, so he'd apply the medicine first. He already had something that could bring Tony down, so the worst that could happen was a fight. Gloating over himself, Sherlock completely forgot about the side effects of his potion. He used the Philosopher's Stone to transmute some gold, then swapped it for a potion for bruises and sprains from the exchange machine and began applying it. But as Sherlock applied it, the potion took effect, and he began to sense something was amiss. Damn it, it felt like he'd forgotten something. Something felt off. It was fine, but why did his chest feel so heavy? Like something was weighing it down. He looked down. Ugh, what's that saying? A woman's toes are so beautiful when she looks down that they can't be seen? Sensing something was wrong, Sherlock almost instinctively touched it. It was still there. Wait? And you can't see your toes when you look down? Holy crap. Ignoring Tony, who was still laughing and dancing, Sherlock hurried to a piece of glass that could serve as a mirror. After seeing his current appearance clearly, Sherlock became completely withdrawn. Judging from his figure alone, this is definitely a figure that only exists in comics. If there's a woman with the same figure as Sherlock, she is definitely the most beautiful woman in the world and is the object of pursuit by countless men. But Sherlock's face, well, how to say it? It's feminine, but not completely feminine. After all, the dragon is still there, and the softness reveals the unique masculinity. Combined with that most beautiful figure in the world, it gives people an extremely torn feeling. Looking at the entry on the top of his head, combined with his current image, Sherlock didn't know why, he really had an urge to destroy the world. Entry, cross-dressing gangster. Entry effect, literally a cross-dressing gangster, a product of a unique Thai trip. It seems this trip wasn't entirely perfect. Perhaps it was due to insufficient dosage or lack of time? I suggest adding a bit more, it might work wonders. Entry time: 23 hours, 30 minutes, and 21 seconds. Sherlock, seeing the entry above his head, angrily slammed the potion in his hand to the ground. Apply? Bullshit. This is even worse than the Captain and Tony's complete transformation. How come everyone else is a beauty, but when it comes to me, I'm stuck in the middle? Damn, Thailand, what the hell? Sherlock, utterly furious, practically covered his face as he ran to Tony's guest room, completely oblivious to Tony, still dancing behind him with his bare teeth. Watching Sherlock flee the basement, face covered, Tony, who had been gloating, no longer cared to laugh, but tried to maintain his irking hand gesture and roared. Climb a star. You're here. Help me to break the spell. Wait a minute, I'm still here, help me to break the spell. Chapter 228 Uncles at Full Power. Unlike Sherlock's anger, Tony felt a greater sense of guilt. He didn't know who Killian was, but he still felt ashamed that he had caused the attack on Sherlock's side. This was why he had desperately tried to stop Sherlock in the first place. Everyone on Earth knew that Iron Man was Tony, and since they couldn't find an opportunity to attack him, they would inevitably turn on those around him. After a long moment of reflection, Tony, feeling increasingly guilty, finally addressed Price. "I'm sorry, Captain Price, this is my fault. I will find the murderer as soon as possible and give everyone an explanation." With that, Tony turned and started to leave, preparing to summon his armor to scan the scene for any useful information. He would also take care of Unit 01 and Unit 02, both to check for any images of the suspect and to attempt repairs. After all, these two robots had been very protective of the two girls resting in the bedroom. Tony still loved them and had no intention of retiring these two heroes. However, before Tony could take 2 steps, Price stopped him. Price stepped forward and grabbed Tony's shoulder. His weathered face was filled with a serious expression, and his voice, slightly hoarse, spoke to Tony. "Listen, kid, I don't care who you've offended or what trouble you've caused, but since these guys dared to attack us, this is definitely not a one-man show. So, I don't care what you do next, but I absolutely forbid you from interfering in our affairs again." Price's words were serious, even a little harsh, but Tony, known for his bad temper, didn't even protest. He quietly walked to the scene and began to work. Tony didn't refute Price because, on the one hand, he knew the old man didn't have a good impression of him, and on the other hand, Price was one of Sherlock's closest people, and Tony didn't want to embarrass Sherlock. Glancing at Tony, who said nothing but walked towards the scene, a rare flicker of appreciation flashed in Price's eyes. Sherlock naturally noticed Price's expression and breathed a sigh of relief. You know, in the past, Price had forbidden Sherlock and Tony from interacting at all, and that was only with Pepper Potts. When had Price finally stopped interfering with Sherlock and Tony? Probably after Tony was kidnapped. Never underestimate Price's intelligence skills, even this time. Seeing no one was interrupting them, Price grabbed Sherlock by the scruff of the neck and led the remaining 4 people toward the back of the training grounds. They reached the nearby CQB training warehouse. To Sherlock's astonishment, he opened the door to the basement and led the others inside. The basement was a perfect movie-like briefing room, with a large screen embedded in the wall and a conference table in the middle, piled with all sorts of intelligence. Sherlock was stunned. Where the hell did this place come from? Sherlock had lived in this training ground his entire life and had no idea such a place existed. Although Sherlock's jaw nearly dropped, Price had no intention of offering an explanation. After throwing Sherlock onto a chair, the 5 uncles took their seats, with Price sitting at the head. "Soap, tell me what you know," Price ordered. Soap inserted a USB drive into the USB port on the table and handed out several documents, including one to Sherlock. The documents contained photos of the scene and some reports Sherlock couldn't understand. The large screen mounted on the wall lit up instantly after Soap inserted the USB drive, and the contents displayed were almost indistinguishable from the documents in the general staff's possession. Seeing that all preparations were complete, Soap stood up, pointed at several photos of the scene, and began to speak. First, based on the evidence at the scene, the explosive was an object approximately 1.7 meters tall. Yes, you read that correctly, the height of an average man. Judging by the conditions at the scene, the explosion generated temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius, a temperature that would have vaporized anything within 12.5 meters. Miraculously, no traces of explosives were detected at the scene. In other words, this wasn't an explosive. Ghost raised his hand, looking at the documents in his hand with disgust, and spoke slowly. Wait a minute, is this another suicide bomber? The kind embedded in the body during surgery? In response to Ghost's question, Soap snapped his fingers before continuing. That's a good question, but unfortunately it's not the case. Based on battlefield experience, if it's the situation you described, the human body would be torn apart and launched out the moment the shock wave appears. Even the high temperature afterwards would make it difficult to completely remove any traces of human tissue. But this time, no human tissue was detected at the scene. So after ruling out all possibilities, I'm more inclined to believe that the so-called person who walked into the store is a moving bomb. After Soap finished speaking, he sat down in his seat. Only then did Gates stand up and continue speaking. I've consulted my friends, Kay, Furbo, informants, and friends within the Department of Defense, and I've got a few clues. First, Furbo reports that similar explosions aren't just one or two, but have occurred in numerous locations, even at the exact locations described by SOAP. This matter has reached the Department of Defense and the group of executives sitting in their offices, sipping coffee. Everyone, top to bottom, is taking this seriously and has launched an investigation, but with limited success. Our foolish president even tried to suppress this news by repainting the armor Tony gave to his Air Force friend and renaming it Iron Patriot to divert public attention. But there's a piece of information from K that caught my eye. A man named the Mandarin has emerged in the Middle East, leading an armed group that's been wreaking havoc there. Most of his actions are directed against Lighthouse, including suicide attacks like this one. However, according to my investigation, this so-called Mandarin is nothing more than a minor British actor named Trevor Slattery. Someone helped him cover up his presence in England, but the cover-up was crude and wouldn't withstand scrutiny. There's another thing that's intriguing me. An informant told me that there have been a lot of cases of limb regeneration in the underground world lately, with some even claiming it can change lives. Many people have tried it, but after repairing their bodies, these people only appear a few times before mysteriously disappearing. No trace can be found, as if they've evaporated into thin air. I briefly compared it with the internal diagram of the explosion site obtained by Fabo, and found that the people who participated in the limb repair and disappeared were not far from the explosion site, so they basically matched up. So I suspect the explosion is most likely related to this limb repair technology. Just as Gates finished speaking, a document from within the Ministry of Defense was projected on the big screen, Ghost said as he operated the computer. I found a document within the Ministry of Defense. It's a soldier rehabilitation program. It states that it can repair limbs lost in battle. A company called AIM has been contracted to do this. Furthermore, this company has close ties to the president. I think you all heard the name of the person in charge, Aldrich Killian. With that, almost everyone's attention turned to Sherlock. Sherlock didn't react at all, his entire expression awestruck. After all, he knew Killian was the mastermind, thanks to his clairvoyance. And yet, these uncles, relying solely on documents and intelligence, had figured out Killian was the real culprit. This was truly unbelievable. Chapter 229 FXXK New Guy. Seeing Sherlock's silly look, Price was really furious. After all, Sherlock was trained by him, so why was he still so silly? Xia Okiang, who was sitting next to Sherlock, reacted quickly and stepped hard on Sherlock under the table. Sherlock finally reacted and saw his uncle's unfriendly look. He coughed twice before speaking. Ahem, I don't know much about Killian. Basically, he's the developer of Extremis and the founder of AIM. He was originally a huge fan of Tony Stark, and when his lab was in crisis, he tried to secure investment from Tony. However, Tony ignored him and stood him up. When he was about to commit suicide, he saw the fireworks and experienced Extremis, which sparked a desire for revenge, and he decided to conduct his own research. Besides collaborating with Maya Hansen on Extremis, he cast Trevor Slattery as the Mandarin, and began to rule behind the scenes. Oh, and by the way, the so-called Extremis is the self-destructing virus. The real bombs are actually those who are injected with Extremis. But not all of them are bombs. From what I understand, his subordinates and he himself can control Extremis, causing the human body to generate extremely high temperatures out of thin air, even melting steel. Killian's plan is to eliminate the president and then convince Vice President Rodriguez to trade Extremis for his daughter's missing leg. He truly controls the entire United States behind the scenes. Furthermore, as the actor's boss, he controls most of the resources in the Middle East, making him easily able to rule half the globe. And Tony might just be one of the people he must avenge on his way to becoming king. According to criminal psychology, Killian's goal is likely to destroy everything around Tony, including his family, loved ones, and friends, making him experience the same despair he felt on the rooftop, thus achieving his revenge. Sherlock rattled off a stream of words, then took a sip of the water on the table, looking a little guilty. The look he gave Price almost said it directly. "Don't do that next time, sir." "I'm afraid." Price ignored Sherlock, tapping his fingers on the table before shifting his gaze to the ghost who had been working on the computer. The ghost ignored Price's gaze and continued tapping away on the keyboard. After a while, he turned the screen to Price and spoke. "There's no way to find Killian's whereabouts. This guy is extremely cautious about his movements and residence, but he did find IIM's headquarters building. But it doesn't seem to be of any use. I hacked into the building's cameras and several computers inside, and most of what I found were administrative documents. And according to the power supply, there are no laboratories or anything like that in the building. In other words, the entire AIM building is full of ordinary civilians, and there's a high probability that we won't find any evidence related to AIM or Killian's whereabouts. After hearing the ghost's report, Price tapped his fingers on the table, rubbing his chin in thought, and spoke after a while. Send out the Black Widows. Gathering intelligence is their specialty. One of their men is injured, so I'm sure they won't refuse. Tell them to find Killian. As for us, Soap, Gates, Zia Okiang, and Ghost, go back and gather your equipment. It's been a while since we've been active, and some people have forgotten how formidable we are. Remember, this time our enemy is a group of exploding firemen. No one is allowed to approach. Kill them swiftly. I trust I don't need to teach you what equipment you need, right? Following Price's command, the 5 seemingly amiable uncles suddenly transformed. A murderous look shone in their eyes, and a bloodthirsty grin crept onto their lips. After responding, the 4 of them immediately left the basement, leaving behind a bewildered Sherlock and Price, who remained seated. Seeing everyone else gone, Sherlock finally grimaced and complained to Price. Uncle Price, there's no need to put you in danger, right? I can just deal with that Killian. You know, I'm a magician, so taking care of the genetically modified human is easy. In response to Sherlock's complaints, Price snorted coldly before speaking. Do you think I don't know? Brat, remember what kind of business we're in? Countless jackals, tigers and leopards are eyeing our training ground. If we don't react, and you're the only one taking action, believe it or not, within a month, the entire training ground will be divided up by all forces. This attack is a signal, a touchstone for all forces to test whether our training ground is still necessary. Remember, those foolish-looking trainees inside the training ground are never good people. They're just jackals and tigers who have sheathed their fangs. Listening to Price's words, Sherlock couldn't help but break into cold sweat. Price was absolutely right. Whether it was the gangs, the mainland hotels, or the official K and Fabo, they were all watching how the training ground would react. Sherlock could certainly deal with Killian quickly by using the wizard's vest, but this also meant that the entire training ground had to endure this attack. Some people might not touch the interests of the training ground for the sake of the wizard, but there would always be brave people who would constantly test the bottom line of the training ground. It was foreseeable that if no action was taken, there would be a lot of trouble in the future. While thinking about Price's words, Sherlock followed Price out of the underground conference room and came to an armory. After Price picked and chose, he threw Sherlock a fully equipped honey badger, a complete set of combat uniforms and corresponding assassination equipment. Then he began to pack up his equipment, and while packing, he instructed Sherlock. Brat, remember, put away your magical tricks for this operation. We have too many people watching us. If you want to keep causing trouble for the training ground, you can use them without restraint. Otherwise, follow our instructions as I taught you. As the master of the training ground, you can't escape. Hearing Price's words, Sherlock didn't argue, quickly changing into all the equipment Price threw at him. After all, this was an operation with the 141st Special Forces, and to be honest, Sherlock had wanted to go on an operation with his uncles for a long time. If Sherlock had any complaints about this operation, it was the yellow bullets in the magazine in his hand. Confused, he stuffed the magazine Price had given him into his magazine rack. After a long pause, Sherlock finally asked the question he wanted to ask. Uncle, can this thing really kill those little firemen with 3,000-degree body temperatures? Faced with Sherlock's question, Price simply smiled, patted the Mk-18 in his hand, and then spoke. Subsonic tungsten core bullets, guaranteed to kill a little cutie. Let's go. When Sherlock followed Price into the hall, his 4 remaining uncles had already equipped themselves. Seeing Task Force 141, which looked exactly like the one in the game, Sherlock felt a surge of excitement. Many forces are watching this battle, and I don't want any casualties. Understand? Oh hi. For as Price's voice fell, Gates, Zia Okiang, Ghost, and Soap all roared and stood straight. Influenced, Sherlock quickly joined his 4 uncles, also standing straight. Looking at the team before him, Price finally smiled with satisfaction and addressed everyone. Very good, let's go to the AIM building. find their executives, get their documents, and force them to reveal the lab's location. We need to eliminate it. Oh hey, 5. Another coordinated roar, this time joined by Sherlock. Just as Sherlock was preparing to join his uncles in a real-life Call of Duty experience, Soap grabbed Sherlock, who was following the group. He pulled 2 Velcro strips from his trouser pocket and applied them to Sherlock's chest and back without hesitation, completely ignoring Sherlock's sullen face. Once both strips were in place, Soap nodded in satisfaction and said, "Fuck, this is our old tradition. Rookie, stick with it." With that, Sherlock's 5 uncles all laughed in unison, leaving Sherlock alone, looking at the green Velcro strips with a look of constipation. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 230 Operation Codename, Don't Tell 1. Time, October 13th, 2012, 1 p.m. Weather, sunny with a partial cloud location, inside a high-rise building next to the AIM building. Mission, Task Force 141, Sherlock. Mission description: observe the movements of personnel within the AIM building, gather intelligence, and prepare for an infiltration that evening. In a beautifully decorated apartment, a dining table sat near the window in the living room. Ghost, like a statue, poised on a Barrett M82A1 anti-material sniper rifle, his scope intently observing every movement within the building across the street. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a beautiful golden glow on Ghost, clad in tactical fatigues and a skull mask. Price, smoking a cigar and holding a large telescope, stood beside Ghost, observing the busy workers across the street from the AIM building. Somewhere in the distance, Gates was typing away at a high-tech-looking desk. Although the 3 of them were each busy with their own tasks, they somehow possessed a harmonious yet powerful beauty. Soon, the apartment door opened, and Soap and Xiaoqiang, dressed in maintenance uniforms, entered, chatting and laughing, carrying a few military-style safe deposit boxes. As Xiaoqiang closed the door, their expressions quickly shifted from a relaxed, joking demeanor to a fierce, soldier-like demeanor, even though they were dressed in seemingly ordinary maintenance uniforms. They casually placed their boxes on the nearby bar and went into the bedroom to change. When they reappeared, they had regained their tough, boot-hardened demeanor. Soap plopped down on the living room sofa after leaving the room and lit a cigarette, while Xiaoqiang went to the refrigerator near the kitchen and took out a bottle of cold Coke. Price's voice rang out at the perfect moment. "Is everything done?" Although Price was speaking to Soap, his entire body didn't move at all, still looking across at the other side with the binoculars raised. After hearing Price's words, Soap calmly held a cigarette in his mouth, picked up his own gun from the coffee table, and answered while inspecting it. "Of course, no one noticed the flaw. Xiaoqiang and I have already placed the rope gun on the top floor, ready to use at any time. We have also locked the door to the top floor, so no one will notice. Even if someone sees us, they will just think something is broken and the maintenance team is coming to fix it with great fanfare. We also brought night vision equipment and infrared imaging equipment for sniper rifles, which is enough for this operation." After hearing Soap's words, Price finally put down the binoculars in his hand and turned to look at Soap sitting on the sofa. "Excellent. Excellent work. We'll be moving tonight. Soap, Xiaoqiang, and Sherlock will enter the AIM building to search for intelligence. Ghost and I will provide support, and Gates will provide technical assistance. You only have one chance, so please remain quiet." After Price finished speaking, everyone hummed a sigh of relief, including Ghost, who was still crouching over his sniper rifle. Seeing everyone's response, Price nodded and continued to observe the other side through his binoculars. The entire 141st team was busy with their own tasks, giving off a sense of tacit understanding, coldness, efficiency, and sharpness. Except for Sherlock. What was Sherlock doing at this moment? The kitchen was ablaze with flames, and the enticing aromas wafted from it, silently reaching everyone's noses, trying to tempt the appetite of everyone in the room. That's right, Sherlock was stirring a large spoon in the kitchen. As for how Sherlock had fallen to being a cook, it was a story that brought tears to his eyes. In Sherlock's mind, Task Force 141's operations were either silent infiltrations, like a shadowy force constantly dispatching enemies with tacit understanding, cold, efficient, and fierce determination, followed by either a silent or spectacular retreat, without a single drag. Or they were thrilling battles, each one a fierce general navigating a vast horde, facing wave after wave of enemies, dancing on the edge of the knife, aiming and firing again, repeatedly dispatching the oncoming enemies, ultimately completing their mission and returning victorious. But the reality was that after Price had told Sherlock about the operation, he took Sherlock to rent an apartment across from the AIM building to observe the AIM staff. Everyone had their own duties, except Sherlock, who had no choice but to play the role of cook, just like at home, responsible for everyone's meals for the next 2 days. There was coldness, efficiency, tacit understanding, and fierceness, but the coldness lay in the purchased ingredients, the efficiency lay in Sherlock's speed in preparing the dishes, the tacit understanding lay in Sherlock's coordination with the kitchen utensils, and the fierceness lay in Sherlock's knife skills. Even Sherlock's imagined excitement was there. It was simply that this place was in the kitchen. Watching all sorts of ingredients swirl in the wok, clouds of fragrance mingling with the splatter of grease and flames, wasn't that enough to make one's blood boil? Hot as hell. Sherlock almost lost control and threw his spatula into the wok. But the work had to be done. After all, Sherlock had heard Price's words, and tonight was the time to act. Reality, after all, wasn't a game or a movie. It wasn't possible to just go in and unleash a devastating slaughter like in the game. While it was possible to achieve the same effect as in the game, the power required was immense. Remember, the 141 in the game had the entire state machinery behind it. The current 141 obviously does not have this capability, but although it is a little troublesome, it does not hinder the execution of the mission at all. With a helpless sigh, Sherlock brought the last dish of 3 fresh vegetables to the table and began to invite everyone to eat. At Sherlock's invitation, Price, Soap, and Ziokian quickly came to the table to start eating, but Ghost and Gates were still motionless doing their own things. Sherlock was used to this. After Price and the others finished eating, they would take over the shift with the two. There was nothing to be surprised about. In less than 5 minutes, Price had stood up and said to everyone while walking towards Ghost, "Go and have a rest for a while, I'll keep an eye on it. We still have to work at night, so we must stay alert, okay?" 5. Chapter 231 Operation Codename, Keep It a Secret 2. The sun gradually faded into golden duck egg yolk, disappearing below the horizon. The light of human technology took over the sun's work and began to provide light for the hard-working workers. Sherlock, who had been exhausted all afternoon, finally regained consciousness. He went into the bathroom for a shower, then dried his hair while staring across at the still brightly lit AIM building, awestruck. It had been ages since I'd felt such resentment. Sure enough, the resentment of workers working overtime was even stronger than that of ghosts. Sherlock's 5 uncles, however, didn't share Sherlock's sentimentality. After all, as soldiers, a small group of elite soldiers, their work was not only fraught with danger but, if you really counted it, even more exhausting than that of ordinary workers. Forget over the overtime, sometimes, working non-stop for days and nights on a single mission wasn't uncommon. But they also had plenty of time for rest. By comparison, ordinary workers were arguably the most miserable group in the world. Unlike the brightly lit AIM building across the street, not a single light was on in the apartment. Aside from the occasional flicker, the only light was the faint glow of Gates's computer screen. As time passed, the bright moon gradually rose, obscuring the starlight, and the lights in the AIM building across the street began to gradually shut down. The workers finally welcomed the happiest time of the day, the end of the day. While the workers were leaving, it also meant the start of work for Sherlock and his 5 uncles. Watching the AIM building across the street go from brightly lit to utter darkness, with only the height indicator lights flickering. In the stillness of the night, the entire building became like a cage of steel and concrete, trapping the danger and darkness within. Ghost and Price, freed from their binoculars and sniper rifles, had a few hours rest. Of course, they weren't idle during this break either, as they began installing infrared and night vision equipment on their weapons to enhance their visibility. Soap, Ziokian, and Sherlock were also packing their gear, checking it over and over again. They were wearing the best equipment. The 4-eye night vision goggles alone were worth $60,000, not to mention the other gear they were wearing. After everyone was finished packing, Price laid out a floor plan of the AIM building on the coffee table and began to speak. According to our observations over the past few days, The AIM building has more than 40 floors in total, and AIM only occupies the middle 5 or so floors. Most of the lower floors are jobs for ordinary employees, which are not very meaningful. Our main purpose is concentrated between floors 30 and 32. Based on our observations over the past 2 days, these 2 floors are most likely the offices of senior executives, and there must be some intelligence we need in them. Above that is the 33rd floor. There is a high probability that there is an AIM server room on the 33rd floor, but according to observations, this server room is only used for administrative purposes here. There is not much significance in obtaining intelligence from it, but we cannot let it go. After all, we don't know AIM's architecture. Maybe the servers here will have an encrypted link with the servers in the AIM laboratory, so our purpose is very simple. When he said this, Price pointed to an office on the floor plan and continued. First, the personnel office. We need to obtain the information files of all employees in the entire AIM company. This is undoubtedly a good intelligence point. AIM is very cunning. Computers above the supervisor level can only connect to the internal LAN. Since the server is physically disconnected from the outside world, Gates has no way to invade, so we have to rely on manual operation. Second, the customer management office. This has almost all of AIM's customer information, most likely including orders with the Ministry of Defense, as well as those illegal customer groups that caused explosions, so this is also your target point. The third is the server room. Gates hopes to connect to the server and see if he can find the location of AIM's laboratory from it. That way, we will save a lot of trouble. As Price finished speaking, Gates took out 2 things, one large and one small, that looked like USB flash drives from his arms and placed them on the coffee table. I've created 2 intrusion USB drives. One only needs to be plugged into a computer port to run autonomously. It's this small one. You can ignore it in the computer room. If you do it discreetly, it'll be hard to detect. But you'll need to retrieve the USB drive from the other 2 offices. And while it's storing information, you can't remove it, or it'll trigger an alarm. So, you need to remain where you are and wait for the USB drive to finish reading. This will take about 5 minutes. After Gates explained his plan and Price nodded, he continued. During this time, the only people you need to watch out for are the AIM night patrols. From what I've observed, the entire building is secured by AIM security personnel. In other words, while AIM doesn't occupy the entire building, security is an exception. And unlike a day shift, the night shift security personnel appear to have undergone military training. As he spoke, Price pulled out a dozen photos from his pocket and tossed them onto the coffee table for everyone to see. The photos showed security personnel wearing body armor and wielding identical P-90 submachine guns. Once everyone had seen the photos, Price continued. AIM security is tight. All patrols operate in pairs, completing a circuit roughly every half hour. The AIM patrols are the most rigorous, with 4 shifts working in pairs. This means you must maintain a low profile. If a firefight breaks out, you'll only have about 20 minutes, after which you'll be pursued by the entire building's security. Also, be aware that the security on AIM's floor will likely be those explosive firemen, so if a firefight breaks out, you must ensure a single kill. An explosion will also attract the entire building's security. Ghost and I will be here to provide support and coverage. Stay safe. This operation is simple, but also very dangerous. I don't want to be unable to feel your warmth when I see you. Do you understand? Understood. 5. Seeing everyone nod, Plas nodded in satisfaction and raised his wrist. Check your watches now. The time is 11 hours, 20 minutes, and 45 seconds. We'll begin the operation at 1 o'clock. Soap, Zia Okiang, and Sherlock can go to the rooftop to prepare. Once in position, check communications. Price paused for a moment before addressing Sherlock. Rookie, remember what I say. Don't use your little tricks unless absolutely necessary. Follow Soap's instructions throughout the entire process and don't mess up. Yes, faced with Price's instructions, what could Sherlock do? He weakly agreed. After all, even now, Sherlock could sense more than one pair of eyes watching them, and Sherlock certainly wouldn't give them any leverage. Chapter 232 Operation Codename, Keep It a Secret 3. After Soap, Zia Okiang, and Sherlock had been enjoying the cold wind on the rooftop for over an hour, Price's voice finally rang through their headsets. Testing, communication testing. Got it, Sherlock got it. Communication working, Soap got it. Communication working, Xiaoqiang got it. Communication working, Ghost got it. Communication working, Gates got it. Communication working. After everyone had responded to Price's call, Price, still in the room, nodded in satisfaction before continuing. Sherlock, remember your codename is Rookie. Use of your real name is prohibited during operations. As Price finished his words, Sherlock's face darkened. Soap and Xiaoqiang, stifling laughter, patted Sherlock's shoulders, and Xiaoqiang even stabbed him. You'll get used to it. We all got through this back then. After that, they hid in the corner, laughing non-stop. Sherlock expressed his disdain for these old men making fun of him, but Price continued his roar through the headset. Rookie. Did you get that? Reply, yes. Rookie got that. Sherlock's reply was weak, a bit puzzled. How could someone like him, someone who had fought aliens, worked for SHIELD, and even visited Asgard, the most mysterious and powerful Avenger, be reduced to Rookie in front of this group? A suppressed chuckle echoed through the headset at Sherlock's weak response. After a long pause, Price continued. Okay, enough fun, action in 1 minute. With Price's command, silence instantly returned to the communication channel. Soap, who was waiting on the rooftop, began directing Sherlock and Xiaoqiang to secure the rope guns. 3 large boxes containing rope guns opened, and 3 rope guns, about the height of a person, appeared on the rooftop. After adjusting the angle, Price gave a word and began to move. 3 alloy grappling hooks, attached to their ropes, launched like sharp swords to the rooftop of the building opposite. With a mechanical hum, the ropes tightened. Soap, after testing their strength, ordered everyone to prepare for the crossing. Sherlock secured the carabiner and, with a nearby climbing device, attached it to the ropes. At Soap's command, the 3 of them swiftly descended the ropes like ghosts in midair, reaching the rooftop of the AIM building. Quickly untying the ropes, the 3 immediately formed a formation and began to guard the area. Soap led the charge, Xiaoqiang and Sherlock brought up the rear. After all, Sherlock, with his reputation as a rookie, naturally had to work from behind, keeping an eye on the rear. It wasn't that Sherlock was incompetent, but rather that this was his first mission with the rest of the 141 team, and his teamwork was lacking. To prevent any blunders that could lead to mission failure, it would have been better to have Sherlock go in as a rookie. The 3 of them quickly reached the rooftop escape door. Xiaoqiang, the center back, pulled a sophisticated-looking chip-like card from Soap's backpack and swiped it through the card reader on the rooftop. In an instant, the locked rooftop door was swung open by Xiaoqiang. As the door swung open, Xiaoqiang gently tapped Soap on the shoulder, who was standing in front of him. Soap carefully opened the door, and the 3 of them filed in. Behind the rooftop door was a dark, closed fire escape. The 3 of them advanced cautiously and lightly in a CQB formation, fearing any noise would attract the guards on other floors. As Sherlock watched the movements behind him, he silently grumbled. This was precisely why he'd been so focused on CQB during his training, inspired by movies and games. His training results were the best of all the subjects Price had assigned him, otherwise, he might not have been able to adapt to the current situation. I can't say much about anything else, but the sensor lights in the hallway alone would easily trigger if they weren't trained. If that attentive guard had caught them, their mission would have been a disaster before they'd even started. The 3 of them slowly made their way through the pitch-black corridors. With the help of their night vision goggles, it wasn't a problem. However, it's worth noting that AIM was quite cunning. Of the 40 floors in the building, floors 30-33 belonged to AIM, and yet the fire exits between floors 31-33 had no doors. In other words, only the ground floor offices, located on the 30th floor, had fire exit doors. Sherlock mentally raved about AIM. As expected, for a company that developed the Extremis virus, were they really obsessed with Extremis? They had no idea how they'd gotten approval from the fire department. If there was a fire or something, wouldn't all the executives who knew about it have to experience the company's flagship product, Extremis? After Sherlock lamented for the nth time that AIM was a shady factory, the 3 of them gradually reached the 31st floor. Just 1 floor down would bring them to the AIM fire escape on the 30th floor. But just then, Soap gestured to halt their advance. After collaborating with Xiaoqiang to fix the sensor lights in the hallway, Soap quietly reported into the comms. Colonel, we've reached our designated location. A moment later, Price's voice rang through the comms. Roger, I've seen you on the infrared image ray and am marking and sharing it with Ghost. Ghost and I will help you keep an eye on the enemy as you enter AIM. Gates will guide your route. As Price finished speaking, Gates' voice echoed through the comms, continuing. I'll be in charge of directing you. When you're ready, let me know. I'll work with the Red Queen to tamper with the surveillance footage in real time to ensure you don't get caught. Roger that, Soap replied, gesturing for everyone to continue forward. But just as Sherlock was about to stand, Price's voice rang out over the comms again. Stand by. I repeat, stand by. 2 guards are heading for the fire escape. As Price spoke, Soap and Xiao Qiang halted their advance, their rifles fixed firmly on the entrance to the 30th floor, while Sherlock remained on guard upstairs, protecting his team from being robbed. The 3 of them didn't have to wait long. About 30 seconds later, there was the sound of a door opening, followed by the clatter of boots in the hallway. As the boots clattered, the sensor lights on the 30th floor quickly lit up, and Sherlock could even catch a glimpse of the warm yellow glow through the gap between the stairs. You go up, I'll go down. Let's take a quick walk and then go back to change shifts and sleep. A strange voice sounded, and a person seemed to start walking upstairs. The sound of leather boots hitting the ground was getting closer and closer, and Sherlock's heartbeat was getting faster and faster. Anyway, even though Sherlock felt that his back was about to be wet with cold sweat, he still stared at the passage upstairs as part of his duty, and did not even look at the passage leading to the downstairs. But sometimes, the less he looked, the more worried and nervous he became. As the sound of leather boots got closer and closer, Sherlock even felt that his heart was about to jump out of his throat. Pa, 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 pa. The sound of leather boots hitting the ground was like a death cry, strangely synchronized with Sherlock's heartbeat, getting closer and closer. Chapter 233 Operation Codename, Keep It a Secret 4. Just as the footsteps drew closer, and Suo Baok and Xiao Qiang's hands were already on the triggers, ready to fire, the unfamiliar voice rang out again. Sheffield, that's enough. Hurry up. I want to get back to sleep. No one but ghosts would come here this late at night. Besides, there's an alarm on the door. Who would be so foolish as to come here? Just go to the Apple store or the supermarket and buy something for free. You'll definitely get more than robbing here. Upon hearing this voice, the man named Sheffield paused, sighed helplessly, and turned to head downstairs. As the footsteps receded, Sherlock breathed a sigh of relief. After all, judging by the footsteps of the man named Sheffield, if he turned around halfway up the stairs, he'd probably see the 3 of them. Sherlock even heard Sheffield sigh clearly. It was clear how close he was. Wait? Sheffield? What the hell? Why does that name sound so familiar? So, during this period, Old Z didn't work at the Ministry of National Defense, but went straight here to work as a security guard? A villainous security guard at that. One can only say that Old Z's career has been remarkably stable. With the sound of a metal door closing, the entire corridor instantly returned to peace. Soap waited a moment, and after all the corridor's sensor lights had turned off, Price addressed the 3 men over the comms. Keep moving forward, they're quite far behind you. After receiving Price's order, Soap gestured, and the 3-man team began advancing cautiously again. In a matter of moments, they reached the fire escape entrance. Soap and Xiao Qiang, each holding a firm grip on either side of the door, Sherlock followed behind Xiao Qiang, keeping an eye on the movements below and above. Only then did Soap resume his comms report to Price. We're in position, about to enter enemy territory. After hearing Soap's report, Price quickly responded. Roger, there are no enemies behind the gate, but you need to act quickly. You only have 3 minutes before the next patrol emerges from the lounge. Command is handing over to Gates immediately. Roger, 30-second countdown. Once it ends, the surveillance footage will be blocked 24, 23, 22, 21. Hearing Gates count down, Xiao Qiang quickly pulled out a device from his pocket and affixed it to the top of the gate. The device was magnetic and had a small, blinking red light. Within 3 seconds, the red light quickly turned green. Seeing the light turn green, Xiao Qiang nodded to Soap. As Gates' countdown ended, Soap carefully opened the door to the office. Silently, without any alarm, Sherlock realized only then that the device Xiao Qiang had affixed was most likely an alarm-blocking device. Seeing the alarm fail, Soap became bolder. He opened the gate with incredible speed, yet still silently, and gestured to Xiao Qiang to proceed. Zhao patted Sherlock's side with his backhand, signaling him to follow. He then entered the main entrance, gun drawn. Seeing Sherlock enter, Soap followed suit, quietly closing the main entrance. Beyond the main entrance was a high-tech looking reception desk, with a small door next to it. Gates's voice rang out. Go around the front desk. There's a large cubicle office area that can be used as a cover to hide from patrol officers. You have 2 minutes. Hearing Gates' words, Zhao quickened his pace. As silently as ghosts in the night, the three of them slipped into the AIM offices. After bypassing the front desk, just as Gates had predicted, they found a large cubicle. Zhao and Sherlock quickly circled to the other side, hiding at the other end. Because the cubicle was so small, it barely concealed Sherlock and Zhao. Soap didn't hide with them, but disappeared, its whereabouts unknown. There was a reason for hiding on the other side instead of in the cubicle. After all, there were 2 patrolmen, and if one of them got the urge to inspect the cubicle, hiding in the cubicle might leave them with no escape route. Always leave yourself some wiggle room. This was the first thing Price had taught Sherlock during his training. Shortly after they took cover, Ghost's voice rang through the comms. I see you, don't worry, rookie. I'm watching you. Ghost's words made Sherlock roll his eyes. Honestly, if it weren't for the show, Sherlock would probably be swaggering around in the stealth suit, acting like a gay. But it's important to note that Ghost only reported his vision now. He and Price used different imaging systems. Price used infrared imaging, which could even see people hiding behind walls, while Ghost used night vision. This was to provide a backup. The 2 imaging systems complemented each other, sharing markers to prevent accidental injuries. Just as the Ghost's teasing voice faded, Sherlock heard the sound of a door lock turning, and the next second, 2 footsteps echoed from the front desk. Damn it, patrol again, Mike. Come over to my place after tonight. I just found a great movie we can watch together. Shit, I'm not planning on flying off with you, but you can lend it to me after you're done. 2 unfamiliar voices, tinged with vulgarity, began to approach from afar, accompanied by the glaring flashlights. In just a few breaths, the flashlights began to sweep across the vast cubicle where Sherlock and his companions were hiding. Sherlock began to tense up, his tactical gloved finger gently resting on the trigger. Of course, he was still praying that these 2 sleazy patrolmen would get away with it quickly and get away from them. But his wish was not fulfilled. Despite their vulgarity and their constant stream of dirty jokes, these 2 patrolmen still had a sense of responsibility. Sherlock listened anxiously as the footsteps approached. Between each cubicle, the man paused briefly. If his guess was correct, he was probably checking each cubicle to see if anyone was still hiding. Unlike Sherlock's nervousness, Zhao seemed to have anticipated this. He patted Sherlock with his backhand, signaling him to follow. Before Sherlock could react, he crouched down and started playing the game of Kin Wang around the pillar with the patrolman. Chapter 234 Operation Codename, Keep It Quiet 5. It must be said that Zhao Kin Emperor's circling the pillar strategy, though simple, was truly effective. Thanks to the dim light and the numerous cubicles obscuring the view, the 2 guards, relying solely on flashlight beams for illumination, failed to detect Zhao and Sherlock. Of course, this tactic wasn't without its flaws, the biggest being its excessive intensity. Those with limited mental resilience simply couldn't pull it off. Can you imagine Sherlock's closest approach to the patrolling guard was less than 2 meters? Sherlock could have sworn he heard the guards breathing. Not to mention the flashlight beams that repeatedly raked Sherlock's head. It was undeniable that none of his 5 uncles were simple, each possessed a unique skill or, at the very least, a generous heart. While one guard was responsible, the other wasn't. The guard inspecting the cubicles had only checked 2 rows before the other began to impatiently urge him on. It seemed as if they didn't want to stay any longer, constantly urging him on. The responsible guard seemed no match for the less responsible one, ultimately checking only 2 rows before being hurried away by another. Only when the 2 flashlight beams completely faded and the office returned to silence did Sherlock finally breathe a sigh of relief. Honestly, this was far more thrilling than the stealth levels he'd played in games. Seeing the guards leave, Zhao turned around with a smile and gave Sherlock a thumbs up, a verbal praise and a plea for more. Sherlock wiped the sweat from his forehead, whether it was from cold sweat or the exhaustion of the series of tactical maneuvers like crawling, crouching, and rolling, and rolled his eyes at Zhao. Just as Sherlock was about to say something, A large hand silently tapped him on the shoulder. That's right, it was completely silent. Sherlock didn't even register the presence of someone behind him. He instinctively wanted to counterattack, his body reacting faster than his mind, launching an elbow backward. As expected, Sherlock's elbow was blocked by two sturdy arms. A familiar, deliberately hushed voice echoed from behind Sherlock. "It's me. Soap. What are you doing, brat? Are you trying to rebel against the Heavenly Gang?" Hearing Soap's voice, Sherlock remembered the missing Soap. A sheepish smile played on his face, and he turned back to Soap with a goofy grin. After all, he'd been so nervous that Sherlock had momentarily forgotten Soap was even there. The brief exchange between the two men couldn't be hidden from Price, who was observing them via infrared. Before Sherlock could even begin to explain, Price's voice rang out over the comms. "Rookie, it looks like you've almost forgotten the stealth techniques I taught you. After this is over, give me a week of dedicated stealth training. If there weren't any enemies nearby right now, your attack would have already led to your squad being discovered." After hearing Price's words, Sherlock's smile quickly vanished, replaced by a bitter expression. That was Price. Price's training, well, only those who practice it know it. It's tough, if not dead. Looking at Sherlock's grimace, Soap patted Sherlock's shoulder with a gloating look, then once again came to the front of the team and whispered, "Come on, brace yourself. The enemy is ahead of us, and their lounge is just behind us. We must be extremely careful. Gates, keep guiding us." After hearing Soap's call, Gates's reply quickly rang through the communication. "Continue down the hallway and you'll see a staircase. Above are the mid-level offices for supervisors and managers, along with the employee lounge, recreational area, and kitchen. Unlike the cubicles you see now, the mid-level offices are all separate, and the lounge area is also open plan. Therefore, you'll need to find a way to pass quickly and avoid attracting attention." Got it. With Gates's introduction complete, Soap quickly organized Ziokiang and Sherlock and continued their advance in a standard CQB formation, though this time everyone's attention was focused on the front and back, leaving the wings slightly relaxed. Just as Gates had predicted, at the end of the cubicle was a white marble staircase. The three of them, clinging to the wall, began to creep up the stairs. Just as they neared the end of the staircase, Ghost's voice came over the comms, halting the group. "Stand still. I have some bad news for you. The two patrolmen you met in the cubicle are now in the break room, seemingly slacking off and chatting. You need to wait, damn it. Rookie, watch out. Ziokiang, switch positions with me, and watch out up ahead." As Ghost finished his words, Soap quickly deployed his formation and began to survey the 31st floor. Above the stairs was a spacious hallway, flanked by individual glass offices. Each office door bore the individual's position and name. On the other side, there was a large open space, distinctly different from the glass offices across the way. It was more lively, with beanbags, treadmills, and some board games. At the far end was a large open kitchen with a massive refrigerator. Two guards were chatting and laughing in the kitchen, drinking coffee. The layout made Soap's scalp itch. There was no way to get through quickly without alerting the guards. Just as Soap was debating whether to find a way to deal with the enemy or wait, even more dire news reached the three of them through Price's mouth. Bad news. Two more guards have emerged from the break room. They appear to be another patrol. You're running out of time. As Price finished speaking, Soap, unable to wait any longer, called out to Gates over the comms. "Gate, see if there are any other routes. We're running out of time. Everyone, stand by and fire in 1 minute." As Soap's command was delivered, two auroras, visible only through night vision goggles, locked onto the heads of the two guards slacking off while sipping coffee. Meanwhile, the crosshairs of two sniper rifles, far across the building, were fixed firmly on the heads of the two guards who had just emerged from the break room. A battle seemed imminent. Chapter 235 Operation Codename, Don't Tell 6. Sherlock's head began to sweat. Honey Badger assault rifle in hand, he locked onto the area downstairs. According to the rules, the moment the gunfire sounded, Sherlock would dodge out and ensure the two guards downstairs were completely killed. However, if Price and Ghost opened fire, the shattering of the curtain wall glass outside the building would inevitably attract the attention of the guards still in the lounge. At that point, it might not be a stealth operation, but a direct assault. Sherlock could even hear the passionate soundtrack unique to Call of Duty, as if the battle was about to begin in the next second. Fortunately, Gates was still very reliable. In less than 10 seconds, Gates provided a solution to the situation. Wait, soap, there should be a hole above your heads. That's the access hatch to the ventilation duct. You can use this duct to get straight to the 32nd floor. As Gates' voice rang out, Sherlock and the other two raised their heads in unison. Gates was right. There was a cover the size of a person above their heads, but the problem was that it was definitely more than 2 meters away. Trying to get up there alone was undoubtedly a pipe dream. At that moment, Soap was torn between opening fire or trying to get up the ventilation duct. Fortunately, Soap wasn't one to waste time. He made a quick decision and turned to the other two. Rookie, keep an eye on those two slackers upstairs. Zia Okiang, give me a hand. I'll see if I can get up there first. Goyle and Crabbe were close friends who grew up together in Queens, and they had always been surprisingly compatible. Back in school, the two were a pair of troubled hooligans. After graduation, their poor grades prevented them from getting into university, and they became idle street urchins. A turning point came when they were preparing to join a major local gang. On their way, they witnessed a small-time leader being shot dead in his car. They knew at that moment that if they continued down this path, they would likely be the next to die. Repenting, they decided to turn over a new leaf. The best way for those at the bottom of society to rise above their status was to join the army. Coincidentally, Deng Tu was facing the early stages of the Gulf War. They enlisted almost simultaneously before the Gulf War and were fortunately assigned to the same squad. However, their luck wasn't quite as good. After completing recruit training, they were drafted directly into the battlefield, where they both struck gold in their first battle. But luck seemed to favor them again. A mortar shell nearly wiped out their entire squad, with only the two of them escaping. Although they survived, both men had their limbs amputated due to the shell. Goyle lost his right arm, and Crabbe lost his left leg. Naturally, the two disabled men would not continue to serve. All they got in exchange for their arm and leg were 2 bronze medals that could be sold for $20, a 5-figure resettlement allowance, and a certificate of service. The two men returned to their home in Queens, but compared to when they served in the army, their lives were even worse after returning, especially after the resettlement allowance ran out. Their lives became tight again. They had tried hard, wanting to make a fuss or at least get a job that could support them. But fate played tricks on them. Their years of service did not meet the preferential treatment policy for disabled soldiers. After all, they were injured and retired during their first mission. Desperate, they couldn't even get a security guard job. No one wanted 2 disabled security guards. Crabbe and Goyle were growing increasingly hopeless in this atmosphere. Just then, AIM arrived, offering to heal their crippled bodies. Deep in despair, they seized the opportunity, especially in the AIM lab, where they wept with joy at their restored right arms and left legs. They considered AIM a shining light in their lives. Killian, the creator of the extremis virus, was a savior to them. Without hesitation, they pledged their loyalty to Killian, who, after a series of tests, immediately appointed them security guards at the AIM building. Furthermore, for Killian, their extremis virus was unlike any other. While others could potentially become explosives if they used it, Goyle experienced no side effects. For Killian, they served as a powerful spies with an AIM security detail, effectively monitoring the loyalty of his personnel. As it happened, 2 people were on duty tonight. Unlike the 2 previous slackers, Crabbe and Goyle were incredibly responsible, meticulously checking every cubicle. As they approached the marble staircase leading up, Crabbe heard something unusual. "Goyle, do you hear anything strange?" "It sounds like drywall cracking." Hearing Crabbe's voice, Goyle, who was inspecting the cubicle on the other side, looked up and shone his flashlight in Crabbe's direction. He shook his head before continuing. "I didn't hear anything. Don't even think about taking so much. Check quickly so we can keep going up. Those 2 bastards, Trevor and Mac, have no sense of responsibility. I don't know how they ended up in Mr. Killian's company." Crabbe's mind flashed back to their awful faces. He shook his head helplessly and resumed his cubicle inspection. The 2 of them moved quickly, checking every cubicle in just a few moments. They headed towards the marble staircase. As expected, they spotted Mike and Trevor slacking off on the 31st floor. What neither of them noticed was that a corner of the plaster covering of the ventilation system inspection tunnel above their heads was missing. Within that missing corner, a bright green light stared intently at them. Seeing that the 2 hadn't noticed, the shadow slowly faded into the darkness. Chapter 236 Operation Code, No Sound 7. Sherlock, already in the ventilation duct, watched helplessly as the two guards, looking furious, marched toward the two guards slacking off on the 31st floor. Honestly, this all fit Sherlock's imagination of Call of Duty perfectly, but after experiencing it in action, Sherlock exclaimed it was truly thrilling. While the two guards were inspecting the cubicle, Soap and Ziokiang formed a human ladder, allowing Soap, who was on top, to finally climb up the man-sized opening. As soon as Soap entered the ventilation duct's access hatch, he lowered the rope, and Ziokiang quickly climbed up the rope like a monkey. Sherlock was left alone. It wasn't that Sherlock didn't want to climb, but rather that he simply couldn't. During his initial training, Sherlock's rope climbing skills were abysmal. He didn't even reach Price's passing grade. No matter how much he trained, he kept doing the same. Price's assessment was that a rotten tree can't be carved. Honestly, this was only possible because Sherlock had grown up under Price's watch. Anyone else would have either been sent back to their home state by Price or simply counted as disabled and shot. Sherlock hadn't even passed rope climbing before, let alone now that he was focusing on magic and hadn't practiced for so long. As luck would have it, the two guards who had been out this time were incredibly responsible, spending a considerable amount of time checking every cubicle, which gave Sherlock an opportunity. Quickly tying the rope around their waists, he was pulled up by Soap and Ziokiang. Even so, the whole experience was an adrenaline-pumping experience. First, there were the two guards at the end of the 31st floor, slacking off. If they'd heard any noise, a single flashlight would have revealed Sherlock and his group climbing the stairwell. Secondly, the three of them needed to be extremely careful, leaving no holes. You have to know that the interior decoration in the lighthouse is often quite fragile. Aside from rigid structures like ventilation ducts and tall buildings, the interior hardwood is essentially constructed from stacked pieces of plasterboard or wood. For example, in this case, the entire ceiling is actually made up of pieces of plasterboard. And plasterboard, as anyone who has worked on a home renovation knows, is brittle and prone to chipping, easily shattering into countless pieces with just the slightest bend. Crucially, the ceilings here are different from those in China. They're interlocking, meaning breaking one piece could potentially cause the entire ceiling to collapse. Therefore, the three of them couldn't afford to be careless. Even with such caution, Sherlock, while being pulled up by Soap and Ziokiang, accidentally chipped a corner of the plasterboard that served as a hidden cover for the vent inspection hatch. It wasn't Sherlock's fault, after all, the plasterboard was right there when he climbed up, and Sherlock had completely accidentally crushed the corner with his knee. Still, the sound of cracking drywall alerted all three, making them afraid to move. This was also the origin of the cracking sound Crabbe had heard while inspecting the cubicle. Fortunately, with Goyle's invisible shield, the incident was barely evaded, and Sherlock and his companions avoided detection, turning a seemingly insidious infiltration mission into a formidable one. Everything in the world is a series of coincidences. For example, even though the drywall was broken, Sherlock still responsibly moved the missing piece back into place. Before Sherlock could even completely release the drywall, the responsible Crabbe and Goyle had already ascended the stairs. A few seconds earlier, they would have likely spotted the dark, man-sized hole in the ceiling, but now, with only a missing corner, it was difficult to detect in the inky darkness. Seeing that no one had noticed their group, Soap gave up his hesitation and began to slowly crawl forward through the small ventilation duct. They had to be even more cautious than usual. After all, the ventilation duct was made of thin, square iron sheets. If they made a loud noise, it would be no different from a tin drum. And most importantly, they were now surrounded by 4 enemies. They moved cautiously throughout the entire process. Sherlock swore he had never experienced such an excruciating crawl. Just a few dozen meters, it felt like a century. Even though the air inside the duct was unusually cool, unlike the stuffy heat in the movies, it couldn't stop Sherlock from sweating profusely. It took them over half an hour to reach the end of the duct, which led to a ventilation vent above the kitchen. Through the grill, they could even see the heads of the 2 guards, still slacking off over coffee, and hear their dirty jokes. But it was clear that the 3 people inside the duct had no interest in listening to their gossip about women. A new challenge presented itself. Above the grill, a 90-degree vertical duct led to the upper floors. Near the center, a silent fan whirred continuously. With this thing in place, the 3 of them could hardly get through. Fuck. Looking at the whirring fan blades above, Ms. Hale cursed softly for no apparent reason and quickly reported to Gates and Price. At that moment, Gates and Price fell silent. The reason was simple: the only thing Gates could do was stop the fan, but stopping it wouldn't create enough space for the three of them to pass. In other words, they were stuck. Soap had only two options: wait quietly in the ventilation duct for the two slackers below to vanish, or jump down and start a fight. Sherlock overheard the conversation between Soap, Price, and Gates. Sherlock naturally understood the two options Soap faced. After a long moment of contemplation, Sherlock cautiously spoke into the comms. "Well, maybe there's a third option." Hearing Sherlock's words, Price instinctively wanted to retort. "Stinky boy, I told you." Countless eyes are watching. Before he could finish his words, Price froze. The three of them were currently in a ventilation duct. Even with his own infrared imaging, not to mention night vision goggles, it was difficult to see Soap and the other two clearly. If it weren't for the initial location, Price would have likely spent a considerable amount of time determining their exact location. And Price's inability to see them meant one thing: anyone observing their movements would have been unable to see Soap and the others. After a moment, Price sighed helplessly and spoke into the comms. "Okay, rookie, just this once, you make the decision. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 237 Operation Codename, Keep It a Secret 8. Hearing Price finally relent, Sherlock could have jumped for joy if they weren't still in the ventilation duct. He couldn't say anything else, but Sherlock had always believed that if he could use his magic, this mission would be much easier. He cursed those damned observers again. If it weren't for them, Killian and AIM would probably have been scattered to ashes by now. After silently cursing them for the nth time, Sherlock put the matter behind him and slowly retreated, pulling Ziokiang and Soap with him. This was to ensure that the special light effect when Sherlock used his magic wouldn't attract the attention of the two fools below. Although the chance was small, it was still necessary to be prepared. The three of them slowly retreated to the middle position. Sherlock, who was at the back, rolled over and swung his hand, and two broomsticks appeared in Sherlock's hands. Lying flat on his back, Sherlock slowly passed the brooms to Ziokiang and Soap in front of him. The two men, though filled with questions, took the exquisitely crafted broom Sherlock handed them. Seeing both had taken it, Sherlock called on Gates over the comms to turn off the damned fan, then took out a matching broom and scooped it up. Then, facing Ziokiang and Soap's "Are you crazy?" looks, he pulled out his wand and offered them what he considered a very kind smile. But to Soap and Ziokiang, it wasn't so kind. It was more like nuclear kindness. Sherlock ignored their thoughts and flicked his wand, sending two beams of light piercing Ziokiang in front of him. Hit by Sherlock's magic, Ziokiang, clutching his broom, slowly shrank as Soap watched in horror. Before Soap could say anything, Sherlock's magic followed suit, hitting Soap as well, and without hesitation, Sherlock blasted himself with two more. Three men, averaging 1.88 meters tall, were forcibly reduced by Sherlock to the size of three remote-controlled cars in the ventilation ducts of a villainous company. The once cramped passageway suddenly became incredibly spacious, wide enough for three men to stand. Soap and Ziokiang examined themselves with amazement. Although they knew Sherlock possessed some remarkable abilities, this was their first time experiencing his magic firsthand. It was truly amazing, even for the experienced Ziokiang and Soap. Price and the others, listening to Soap and Ziokiang's constant exclamations of wonder, were genuinely curious to know what was going on over there. However, as they were still on a mission and had their own tasks to perform, they suppressed their curiosity for the time being and continued their duties in silence. Compared to Price's solemnity, the atmosphere on Sherlock's side was undoubtedly much more relaxed. Due to their reduced size, their voices also shrank, allowing them to communicate without having to suppress their voices. At least they could return to normal. Their voices, combined with the reduced distance, meant that even if those two fools heard them, they'd probably mistake them for mice or something. Sherlock rolled his eyes helplessly as he watched Ziokiang and Soap, experiencing magic for the first time, excitedly touching and examining themselves. He couldn't imagine how they would react to if he told them that a man named Pym had achieved this feat decades ago through technology, and that even later on, a man nicknamed Ant-Man would be able to shrink into the quantum realm. Reluctantly halting the two curious children's exploration, Sherlock gave them a unique broomstick flying lesson in the ventilation duct. They finally understood why Sherlock had rolled his eyes when Price said they weren't allowed to use magic. Damn, if they had such abilities, they would have rolled their eyes too. After all, Sherlock's magic was truly incredible. Xiaoqiang and Soap both felt that if Sherlock had done it alone, this task would have been incredibly easy. They also had a general understanding of Sherlock's prowess. Needless to say, after the two of them had discussed this, they were certain of one thing: their skills would be no different from children's to Sherlock's. If Sherlock got serious, let alone his own men, even if an entire army were deployed, even if its personnel were elite trained to the same level as his own, they would likely be no match for Sherlock. The best way to completely kill Sherlock would probably be to detonate a nuclear bomb near him before he could react. At least that's how Soap and Xiaoqiang felt. After about 5 minutes of emergency training from Sherlock, Xiaoqiang and Soap, already all-around pros, quickly mastered the flying broom. It was far easier than flying a plane. For Xiaoqiang and Soap, operating it was about as easy as driving a baby stroller, a fool's errand. With Sherlock's magical power, the once difficult task suddenly became simple, thanks to the flying broom's complete silence. If they weren't afraid of attracting attention, they could have easily sung their way to their target room on the 32nd floor. And indeed, that's what they did. Although they didn't sing along the way, with such convenient conditions, the three of them easily followed Gates's guidance to the ventilation vent above the HR manager's office. Through the vent, they quickly took in the layout of the so-called executive's office. It's true that there's nothing wrong with an employee wanting a promotion. Salary increases are another matter. The office environment alone is pleasing to the eye. Unlike the glass-walled office on the 31st floor, the 32nd floor's office is undoubtedly far more luxurious, even looking like an ordinary home. There's a sofa, a wardrobe, a separate wet bar, and even a screen with a reclining chair behind it for the office's occupant to relax. If it weren't for the luxurious desk, no one would have guessed it was actually an office. Even the walls were no longer the visible glass, but normal walls. Near the corridor, there were a few potted plants. The only connection to the outside world was a soundproof shutter and a priceless-looking wooden door. Perhaps due to AIM's regulations, the shutters must be open after hours to allow patrols to inspect. However, this also posed a problem. The two guards in charge were currently patrolling the 32nd floor. How could Sherlock and the other two recover their positions, remove the office vent, and jump down to access the computer and seize the information without alerting the guards? Chapter 238 Operation Codename, Don't Tell 9. The three men chattered for a long time in the ventilation duct before finally deciding to proceed with their original plan. After all, countless eyes were watching them from outside, and it would be impossible for Sherlock and his team to sneak in under their noses. Don't even mention the confusion charm to Sherlock. Using it would only make things more troublesome. There's no shortage of clever people in this world, and any slip-up would mean countless trouble for Sherlock's training grounds. It was simply a matter of necessity. The three men weren't the type to waste time. After simply using the hose camera to check that the office was empty, Sherlock returned to their original forms one by one. Of course, Xiaoqiang and Soap still commandeered the flying broom, but they were temporarily keeping it with Sherlock. After all, such a fun and useful item, Xiaoqiang and Soap couldn't bear to give it up. The three men carefully opened the ventilation vents and silently and in order, they descended into the HR office on the 32nd floor. It must be said that while AIM's actions might be a bit of a jerk, they're certainly generous with their hardware. Take, for example, the computers at Human Resources Steel. A modern desk boasts a single thin display screen, devoid of any other hardware. The thickness of the display alone tells you this isn't some junky all-in-one computer. Before Sherlock could get a closer look, Soap began quietly assigning tasks. Rookie, you're young. Take this thing and go fix that computer. Xiaoqiang, watch the left corridor, and I'll watch the right. Be sure to keep a low profile. I just checked, and this office door isn't locked. Rookie, find a way to plug this thing into the computer, then find someplace to hide. Patrol officers might be coming any minute, Soap muttered as he handed Sherlock what looked like a USB flash drive. Without hesitation, Sherlock decisively headed for the desk. It wasn't until Sherlock got closer that he finally got a clear look at the desk. My goodness! Sherlock was completely amazed. This wasn't a desk at all, it was just a desktop computer. AIM was truly extravagant. They'd custom-made every executive with the most advanced computer components available. That was fine, but even the desks were custom-made, with computer cases literally crammed into them. Sherlock hadn't even seen such extravagance at Tony Stark's company. Similarly, Sherlock couldn't help but sigh. This was pure extravagance on the part of AIM. Forget the whole package, just throwing a single component into the card room would be enough to send those junky people into a frenzy. And the wealthy AIM actually used this thing for work? Sure enough, Sherlock couldn't comprehend the world of the rich. But no matter how advanced this thing was, it was still just a computer, and computers were subject to basic operating rules. Without a moment's hesitation, Sherlock found the power button and pressed it. But accidents often come suddenly. The moment Sherlock turned on his computer, a flashlight beam appeared in the hallway. Though it was far from their current office, it was enough to startle Sherlock. Soap and Xiaoqiang were even more startled by the sudden appearance of the flashlight. Their reaction was textbook. They crouched down the moment the beam appeared, hiding from the window. Meanwhile, Soap frantically gestured to Sherlock to hide. Sherlock reacted quickly. While Soap and Xiaoqiang hid, Sherlock quickly inserted the USB drive Soap had given him into the computer's USB port. Without hesitation, he turned off the computer screen and dove behind the screen that served as the HR manager's rest area. Shortly after Sherlock dove behind the screen, the flashlight began to approach the office. It was none other than the responsible Crabbe and Goyle. At that moment, everyone's heart leaped to their throat, fearing the two guards would notice something. This was likely the office of a senior executive. Although Crabbe and Goyle were Killian's men, they showed respect to the people who kept the company running. They didn't check every cubicle like they did with the lower-level employees. They simply glanced at the window with their flashlights, finding nothing unusual, and left. Only after the footsteps faded did the three people hiding in the office breathe a sigh of relief. Then, Gates' voice rang out. Wow, that was a close call. We almost failed the mission. Hearing Gates' words, Soap grumbled through the comms, practically gritting his teeth. It was close call. Gates, you should have warned us. Hearing Soap's complaints, Gates was also bewildered. He rolled his eyes fiercely at his computer before speaking. How did I know AIM's computers had anti-tracking software? If I hadn't been so quick, the whole building would be sirens ringing. Hearing Gates's rant, Soap fell silent. Even a fool would have known they were talking about something else, but the entire conversation was so riddled with flaws that Soap was at a loss for words. Fortunately, Price intervened. Okay, this is my fault. The office interior is covered in infrared blocking material. I couldn't see the guard through my scope just now, and the ghost's night vision wasn't able to detect him because of the building, which put you in danger. With the boss's words, Gates and Soap fell silent. After all these years of being together, even if a mistake had occurred, it would have been nothing more than a brawl, followed by a beer. So, in tacit agreement, they didn't bring it up again, moving on from the subject. After Gates announced the required time, the entire communication channel fell silent. While the communication channel had gone quiet, it didn't mean Sherlock was silent either. After all, his five uncles usually gave Sherlock the impression of being serious and earnest, though they could occasionally be a bit playful. But Sherlock hadn't expected them to be so playful during a mission. Well, how should I put it? The Call of Duty filter had been completely shattered. Chapter 239 Operation Codename, Don't Tell 10. I have a question, my dear comrade Colonel. May I ask, have they been so naughty on missions before? A grumble escaped him, having been suppressed for so long. Sherlock's rant ended, and the entire channel fell silent for a few seconds. Then, almost simultaneously, Soap and Gates began cursing. Exclamation mark, @ and, %, to the difference was that Soap muffled his curses, while Gates furiously pounded away at his keyboard. Honestly, if they weren't on a mission, and a covert one at that, Sherlock suspected Soap would have come running over and smacked him in the ass with his boot. If they were on the training ground, he'd probably just give him a slam. Listening to the chatter reminiscent of a market, Price, manning the sniper rifle, pinched his brow in a nagging headache. Meanwhile, Ghost, on the other side, smiled a hidden smile beneath his mask. After a while, Price finally called a halt to the two men's ramblings over the comms channel. Alright, the fun's over. Soap and guys, be quiet. Don't forget you're still on a mission. And, rookie, please just call me Colonel. If you really want a prefix, I suggest you add Mr. or something like that. Just remember, decades ago, that address alone would have been enough for the military police to interrogate you for 10 days or half a month. Price couldn't help but grumble over the comms channel. Sherlock could only shrug from behind the screen, silently grumbling, haha, you rednecks don't even understand the allure of that title. However, after this commotion, the initial tension of the covert mission had mostly dissipated, and the pressure on Sherlock and the other two, who were in charge of the covert mission, was less intense. It's fair to say that high-level military personnel have their own ways of dealing with stress. The three of them hid in the room, bored, for about 3 minutes before Gaz's voice rang through the comms channel once again. Done. The good news is, the account management office isn't too far from you. Just around the corner. After hearing Gates's news, Soap couldn't help but frown before continuing. What's the bad news? Gates continued, typing frantically at the keyboard. The bad news is, you don't have much time left. There seems to be a hidden AI within that damn AIM system. It's constantly attacking my computer, and I can only hold out for about 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, I need you to split into 2 groups. One group will go to the upstairs computer room to install the receiver I gave you. This will allow me to block that damn AI from detecting it in the server. The other group will proceed as planned to the account management office and insert the hacking USB drive I gave you. This is the fastest solution. You must hurry, I can't hold out much longer. Hearing Gates' increasingly rapid speech, Soap's brows furrowed, and he began to quickly arrange the task flow. Rookie, take the USB drive to the customer management office and help Gaz get treatment. Zia Okiang, you and I will quickly get to the computer room. Gaz won't hold out for much longer. Rookie, I'm giving you full fire authority. If we're discovered, strike first, don't hesitate. Soap paused before continuing. If all else fails, I allow you to use your magic. Remember, no intelligence is worth your life. After hearing Soap's instructions, Sherlock nodded obediently, not taking them seriously. Though Sherlock had been focusing too much on magic and neglecting military training in recent years, he was still a member of Team 141 who had trained for 7 years. He felt confident facing these players who only knew how to use medicine. If he actually used magic against these little bastards, it would be a disgrace to the 5 of them. After completing his assignment and making sure the corridor was clear, Soap, Sherlock, Zia Okiang, and the other 2 slowly opened the office door and walked out in a standard CQB formation. This time, because Sherlock needed to leave midway, he didn't stand at the back of the group. Instead, he swapped places with Zia Okiang and stood in the middle. Just as Gates had said, the client management office wasn't far from the HR office. After exiting a door and walking less than 5 steps, he saw a double-leaf metal door around the corner. Judging by the door's construction and locking mechanism, it seemed to be magnetically locked. With a few gestures from Soap, Zia Okiang quickly pulled a palm-sized black box from his backpack and handed it to Sherlock. Sherlock then separated from the group and approached the door alone. It was a practical magnetic locking device, the mechanism of which Sherlock had no idea, but he knew how to use it. He placed the small box near the top of the door. With a barely audible beep, the previously tightly closed door began to sway slightly. Without hesitation, Sherlock grabbed the small box and slipped it into his pocket. With his gun raised, he cautiously entered the so-called client management office. But upon entering, Sherlock was stunned. This place wasn't the computer-based client files they'd initially imagined. Instead, it was rows and rows of filing cabinets filled with paper files. Of course, there were computers, too. In front of the rows of cabinets sat a seemingly ordinary-looking computer. And most importantly, there weren't a single window. The entire room was practically filled with filing cabinets. A pure replica of Hydra's archives. Sherlock felt his head about to explode. He hadn't expected anything like this, and he quickly called out to Gates through his headset. Gates, rookie here. We're in trouble. Damn you, Killian. A biotech company is using paper storage. Hearing Sherlock's voice, Gates fell silent for a moment before continuing. No electronic devices? Pure paper files. After hearing Gates' words, Sherlock opened his computer and inserted the USB drive he had in his hand before replying. There's a computer that's already plugged your USB drive into it, but I don't think there's much hope." At this moment, Price's voice interrupted Sherlock and Gates's communication. "Rookie, I lost sight of you. I repeat, I lost sight of you." Chapter 240 Operation Codename, Don't Tell 11. As soon as Price said this, Sherlock and Gates were both silent for a moment. However, Sherlock was incredibly quick-witted and understood Price's meaning in a matter of seconds. "You have to understand that the so-called customer management office Sherlock was currently in was essentially a small archive room. Crucially, it lacked any windows. Furthermore, to maintain a constant temperature and humidity, the door was rarely opened, not even by patrol officers. This meant that Sherlock's customer management office was essentially a small, secret room, not much different from a few people trapped in a ventilation duct. And now that Price had announced over the comms that he had lost Sherlock's sight, the implication was clear: he couldn't see here, and similarly, the group staring at 141 couldn't see Sherlock either. The infrared imaging scope Price was holding was no cheap item. It could see through walls and detect an enemy's body temperature. Compared to ordinary infrared imaging, the one Price held was undeniably zenithal technology. Even if Tony were to build an infrared imaging device, it wouldn't be much better than what Price currently possessed. This was simply due to the limitations of the times. It was like Tony couldn't build a nanosuit like the Mark 50. Price interrupted their conversation and inexplicably addressed Sherlock with a suggestive remark, the meaning of which was clear: "Go forth and use those magical tricks." Sherlock even suspected Price's reticence was due to his cautious nature, fearing someone might be eavesdropping on their communications. After all, while they possessed a wealth of valuable resources, in this era of rampant activity, it was hard to imagine the other side possessing any cutting-edge technology. After receiving Price's authorization, Sherlock wasted no time, responding briefly over the comms before getting to work. Price, who knew Sherlock well, understood Sherlock's understanding after hearing his somewhat perfunctory response. He sighed helplessly before returning to assisting Soap and Xiaoqiang. After all, compared to Sherlock, who had already entered the safe zone, the situation with Soap and Xiaoqiang was undoubtedly far more dangerous. As for Sherlock, after perfunctorily dealing with Price, his first order of business was to wander the archives room. He wanted to determine if there were any surveillance cameras, and how many. After a thorough investigation, Sherlock discovered quite a few hidden cameras, in addition to the cameras in the four corners. Most of them were hidden on the shelves, secretly monitoring the filing cabinets. Only one camera was in a strange location, under the desk. Crucially, it was a standalone camera, disconnected from the internet. Sherlock couldn't understand why such a strange camera was under the desk. Driven by curiosity, he used a computer found in the library to read the contents of a memory card. Let's just say the contents were rather unsightly. However, he did learn that the archives room's manager was a woman who liked to wear short skirts. Having satisfied his curiosity, Sherlock was left speechless, unable to express his feelings. He could only sigh. AIM is worthy of being the company chosen by the writers to be the villain. Killian and Iron Man 3, the sweatshops aside, the most crucial thing was the presence of the guy who installed the cameras. If not you, who would be the villain? Killian's death was truly well deserved. After sighing, Sherlock pulled out his phone and made a call. After just a few rings, the line was answered, and the person who answered was none other than the person Sherlock was looking for. "Good evening, Mr. Sherlock. Mr. Tony is in the basement lab. Would you like me to transfer you?" Jarvis's slightly mechanical voice reached Sherlock through the receiver. Hearing Jarvis's voice, Sherlock's smile widened, and he quickly rejected Jarvis's request. No, Jarvis, I'm not here for Tony. I'm here for you." After hearing Sherlock's words, Jarvis, the artificial intelligence, paused for a moment before continuing. "Of course, sir. I'm happy to help you. What can I do for you?" "Of course I'll help you. What else could I do?" Sherlock, after all, possesses secondary authority granted by Tony, essentially the same as Pepper Potts. Of course, he could ask Jarvis for something. Otherwise, why did Jarvis patiently endure Sherlock's idiotic remarks and even help Sherlock download a pornographic movie to prank Tony? While Jarvis didn't want to bother with Sherlock just because of that idiotic comment, Sherlock had the authority, which was a source of frustration for Jarvis, who didn't have a body. After hearing Jarvis's agreement, Sherlock didn't hesitate and immediately stated his request. "Jarvis, do you know AIM?" I'm in the account management office in the AIM building. I need you to locate me and disable the cameras here, so that the footage on the other side remains on a loop. Can you do that?" Sherlock's reason for calling Jarvis, wanting his help, was actually quite simple. Remember, Sherlock actually has an intelligent AI assistant at home? Sherlock named her the Red Queen. There were two reasons why he didn't ask his own Red Queen to do this. First, the Red Queen's computing power was insufficient. Being able to hide Sherlock, Soap, and Xiaoqiang from the camera in real time was already a feat. She simply didn't have the extra computing power to process more information. Furthermore, Sherlock's request was both simple and difficult, as it involved a certain level of autonomy and video editing. But Jarvis was different. Even after Vision's creation, Tony admitted he could never create another Jarvis, and could only use a lesser Friday. Jarvis sometimes even surpassed ordinary humans in information processing. As for computing power, backed by Tony's vast financial resources, Jarvis's difference compared to the Red Queen was more like the gap between a quantum computer and a large server, a generational gap. Chapter 241 Operation Codename, Keep It a Secret 12. It only took a moment for Jarvis's response to reach Sherlock over the phone. "I'm sorry, sir, AIM's external network is very busy, so I can't hack and modify the surveillance footage for you. If you can connect your phone directly to AIM's internal network, I can try. I've run some tests, and they show that a computer is actively engaging in a hacking and counter-hacking battle with AIM's internal services, consuming a significant amount of bandwidth. Furthermore, within AIM, an AI is modifying the surveillance footage in real time. Are you sure you still want me to hack and modify the surveillance footage?" After hearing Jarvis's report, Sherlock couldn't help but marvel at Jarvis's power once again. He could detect the battle between AIM and Gates from the perimeter, and even find the Red Queen's traces. Honestly, if they weren't still on a mission, Sherlock would have known just how powerful Jarvis was. He even considered calling Tony right then and there to ask if the Red Queen he'd given him was defective. Fortunately, still on mission, Sherlock still had a modicum of common sense. Faced with Jarvis's question, Sherlock readily agreed. "Of course, Jarvis, I'll connect my phone to AIM's intranet right now. The AI and the computer are ours. If you can, you could help clean up the mess," Sherlock said as he searched his pockets. It was a good thing Sherlock always carried a charger, otherwise, finding a data cable would be difficult in this situation. He connected his phone to the only computer in the archives room, and Jarvis' voice came through the receiver. "Okay, Mr. Sherlock, I'll complete your request in 1 minute." Time passed, and within a minute, Jarvis had completed Sherlock's request. Sherlock thanked him, hung up the phone, and put away his equipment. Coincidentally, Gates also informed Sherlock at this moment that the data from the computer had been collected and the USB drive could be recycled. Without hesitation, Sherlock packed his belongings. After using the Philosopher's Stone to obtain some gold, he bought another suitcase, the same model as Newt's, from the vending machine in his library. Then, just like he had done in the Hydra base beneath SHIELD's Trident Tower, Sherlock transformed himself into a ruthless moving machine, cramming the filing cabinets one by one into the seemingly small suitcase. Of course, the entire process was done with magic. Sherlock wouldn't foolishly do it himself. Although this wasn't the first time, Sherlock couldn't help but marvel at the sheer convenience of magic. After all, even something as tedious as moving things could be made truly automatic through magic, a feat that would be astonishing in the Muggle world. Who knows what those non-magical Muggles would think when they saw the filing cabinets, as if they had grown legs, leap into the suitcase with a hilariously adorable gait. And the cabinets would even rearrange themselves, ensuring that whatever the 4 cabinets looked like would appear exactly the same inside. It was simply amazing. Of course, Sherlock wouldn't just sit there and watch bored. With nothing to do anyway, he grabbed a filing cabinet, grabbed a few documents, and began to read. It was just a matter of fate. When Sherlock saw those incredibly familiar names on the documents he'd grabbed, he was completely speechless. Wow, Crabbe, Goyle, Mac, Trevor, Sheffield? Wow, damn, they're amazing, that's right. Sherlock had the files on the guards he'd seen along the way. Just as Price had said, these security guards patrolling AIM's floors were like bombers, all infected with extremis. The only thing was their names. How could he put it? All villains? What? Mac and Trevor were the main characters? Not really villains? Hey, men, Why don't you just look back at what you did in Los Santos controlling Trevor and Mac back when you were playing the game? Putting missions aside, the free time alone is enough to get you executed 10 times over. No one would actually drive the line in Los Santos, wait at traffic lights, and ignore the women standing on the side of the road without completing missions, right? No way? No way? That's Los Santos. Compared to Los Santos, Gotham City is pretty down to earth. As the saying goes, if you were in Gotham City, you might still have a chance of survival if you played it safe, but if you're in Los Santos, I suggest you just buy a gun and start over. If you're even more unlucky and end up in online Los Santos, just go for the accelerator. At least it's a much easier way to die than getting hit by a car while buying a gun, getting caught in a gunfight, getting robbed, or getting bombed all over the map by some idiot with a flying saucer. After a moment of silent grumbling, Sherlock stuffed the file back into the cabinet, letting the unfortunate cabinet lead just grab go, returning it to its rightful place. Sherlock didn't dare look any further. God only knew what other, utterly shattering things this chaotic Marvel universe had in store. Sherlock was even beginning to feel fortunate that he hadn't actually reached his original destination of Los Angeles during his self-driving trip. Otherwise, he might have experienced a real-life version of the series. It might even be an online version, and with the evolution of the Marvel Universe's timeline, there might even be mods added. The mere thought of it made Sherlock break out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, Sherlock didn't have much time to let his imagination run wild. Shortly after letting the cabinet go, the entire archive room was completely cleared out. The cunning Sherlock even cast a permanent confusion charm. Only those with magical prowess like Sherlock could see the truly empty archive room. Otherwise, muggles would only see the archive room as it was. Well, this is how they blatantly bully AIM, saying they're all muggles. So what? Sherlock was very satisfied with his actions. Just as he was about to contact Gates to ask if anyone was outside the door and to evacuate, Gates' voice rang out over the comms. "Rookie, are you done over there? Soap and Ziokiang need your support." Chapter 242 Operation Codename, Don't Tell 13. Honestly, Sherlock's nerves flared after hearing Gates's transmission, his mind racing with every scenario. Firefight? Capture? Injury? All sorts of scenarios began playing out in Sherlock's mind, replaying over and over again until he felt a bit distraught. After all, as one of Sherlock's 5 uncles, if battlefield survivability wasn't an issue, Sherlock felt that Soap and Ziokiang combined were several times his own, magic aside. If Soap and Ziokiang combined couldn't handle a situation, how could he handle it if he truly couldn't use magic? Sherlock himself didn't know. As he hurried, Sherlock mentally planned out every possible scenario, considering almost every worst-case scenario. But what Sherlock never expected was that the problem Soap and Ziokiang faced wasn't even one of the scenarios he'd considered. Sherlock hurried to the end of the 32nd floor office building. Just up one staircase, he'd find himself in the boss's office on the 33rd floor, Killian's. But Sherlock was surprised to encounter Soap and Ziokiang, both looking troubled, at the stairwell. Their expressions were more like they'd eaten shit. It's hard to describe, but at first glance, they were speechless and furious. Sherlock, expecting many unusual circumstances, was surprised they'd stopped there, completely motionless. Questions flooded his mind. What happened? Why aren't you moving on? There's still help waiting for us at Gates, Sherlock questioned. Soap's face darkened in response to Sherlock's question, while Ziokiang sighed helplessly and pointed toward the stairs behind him. Go see for yourself, he said. After hearing Ziokiang's words, Sherlock's mind was still full of questions. After scratching his head, he cautiously made his way up the stairs. Killian's office gradually came into view. It must be said that Killian, while a villain, truly enjoyed himself. The entire office was more like the living room of a spacious, one-story house, lavishly decorated and equipped with every functional area. It had a kitchen, a bar, an office area, and a reception area, all perfectly adequate. Added a bedroom, and the look of a sophisticated high-rise residence. But the most striking feature wasn't the 4 essential amenities, but the luxurious yet understated decor of the entire office. As everyone knows, high-rise buildings are mostly enclosed by glass walls. While the views are truly breathtaking, opening windows for ventilation is undoubtedly impossible. But Killian's office had a natural breeze. Standing at the stairwell, Sherlock could even smell the distinct New York air. Indeed, even without windows, The unique decor allowed for a natural breeze. Sherlock had seen this design in a recent interior design magazine. He had never expected to see it in real life for the first time in Killian's office. And most importantly, the glass walls created a truly captivating atmosphere. You have to know that the entire AIM building is clad in glass curtain walls, even the exterior of AIM itself. But not all glass is the same. Sherlock was certain that the glass curtain walls of the offices on floors 30 to 32 were just ordinary tempered glass, with at most one or a few layers of laminated glass to ensure that even if damaged, they wouldn't harm pedestrians or people in the offices below. But the glass curtain wall on the 33rd floor was clearly different from the ones below. Although it was all glass, and although its light transmittance was even better than that of the 30th to 32nd floors below, it was nearly as thick as an adult's fist. Just based on that thickness, Sherlock was certain that the entire 33rd floor's exterior glass was bulletproof. But that wasn't the most impressive thing. The most impressive thing was Killian's desk. Wow, a massive, all-carved mahogany desk. Sherlock could see the intricate carvings from a distance, and the very appearance of it told of its age. Sherlock hadn't even seen a desk like this at Tony's. If anything, maybe you could find a similar model in a museum? Just looking at that desk made Sherlock shudder. What kind of nice person would use an antique as their desk? But that wasn't the most impressive thing. The most impressive thing was the backdrop behind Killian's desk. Behind the executive chair was a massive, high-transparency crystal glass. Through it, rows of server cabinets gleamed with blue lights. Combined with the room's unique decor and dim lighting, it gave the illusion of endless extension. The vast glass effectively blocked out the noise from the servers, and with the unique decor, Sherlock could almost sense how overwhelming Killian must be sitting behind that massive antique desk. It was a perfect blend of technology and retro. However, what really stopped Soap and Xiaoqiang in their tracks wasn't the luxurious decor of Killian's office, but the people gathered in the boxing ring in Killian's office lounge area. Yes, that's right, 4 people in total, and Sherlock happened to recognize them all, the guards he'd just stumbled upon in the archives room. Responsible Crab and Goyle, Carefree Mac and Trevor. Crab was currently engaged in a Royal City sparring match with Trevor in the ring, while Goyle and Mac stood by, coaching the two like coaches. Sherlock was stunned by the bizarre scene. This was pure Harry Potter and Give Him Love 5 fantasy crossover. If things weren't going well, Sherlock would have jumped up and delivered a passionate commentary. He even had a name for the match ready, Slytherin versus the Lost Gods. Sherlock, realizing the hunger, ran downstairs with a constipated look on his face to meet up with Soap and Xiaoqiang. He understood why Soap looked like he'd eaten shit. Oh my god, Gates was still waiting to complete his mission and save his life, and 2 groups of guards upstairs were already engaged in a Royal City sparring match and wouldn't leave? Isn't this pure madness? After a long period of simmering curiosity, Sherlock finally gave in and quietly pulled Xiaoqiang aside to ask, "What's going on?" The guards inside AIM are actually fighting each other, Xiaoqiang, upon hearing Sherlock's question, replied with a look of annoyance. It seems like the guards are resolving a conflict internally. 2 responsible guys couldn't stand the 2 slacking off, so they issued a challenge. Besides not using their flaming bomber ability, Soap and I observed them for a while and saw that they were completely merciless. Listening to their chatter, it seems like this happens quite often, about once a week. Damn, we actually got caught up in it today. Chapter 243 Operation Codename, Don't Tell 14. Sherlock was speechless at Xiaoqiang's explanation. Goodness, if that idea were applied to lottery tickets, even the richest man would be no match for Tony by now. But since there's a problem, there has to be a solution, right? Without Sherlock, Soap would have 2 options: drag Xiaoqiang along, while the 4 guards were caught off guard, and instantly shoot them in the head. Then, pray no one noticed. Within 20 minutes, quickly get to the server behind Killian's desk, plug in the signal receiver Gates had given, and evacuate. Whether that would alert the enemy would be a matter for later. Alternatively, abandon the server behind, evacuate everyone now, hope that AIM will just treat Gates as a common intrusion, and then return to the hospital hoping to find even the slightest clue amidst the chaos. Either option had a ridiculously low margin of error, forcing Soap to reconsider. That's why Gates told Sherlock to think of a solution. After all, Sherlock had plenty of ideas and some magical gadgets that might be able to solve the problem. This dilemma effectively put Sherlock in a difficult position. While magic could easily solve these problems, Killian's office wasn't a sealed space. If Sherlock truly used supernatural powers, exposing his identity might be a minor issue. His own business could be in jeopardy. But at this point, asking Sherlock to give up seemed a bit unreasonable. Like Soap, Sherlock crouched on the ground, holding his head in his hands, and began to ponder a solution. As he pondered, Sherlock began to search his library for something useful. And surprisingly, Sherlock actually found something that worked. A tranquilizer bullet, manufactured by SHIELD. A silent, odorless, and painless product, it could knock down even a cow instantly. Crucially, it had a special property: it caused temporary amnesia. In other words, upon waking up, the victim would have no recollection of why or how they passed out. The human brain has a remarkable ability: its ability to flow logically. When something illogical happens, the brain will fill in the blanks to make sense of it. In other words, after being struck by this tranquilizer bullet and waking up, while they won't remember how they passed out, they'll find their own excuses for why. All Sherlock had to do was knock them out, sort out the scene, and make it appear reasonable. The rest was up to them. It was truly magical. Sherlock still remembered the feeling of wonder he'd felt upon hearing the introduction to this bullet. Without hesitation, Sherlock immediately pulled out this SHIELD tranquilizer bullet. After explaining it to Soap and Xiaoqiang, the three of them, just to be safe, emptied a magazine and replaced it with this tranquilizer bullet. After replacing the bullets, the three of them quietly climbed the stairs to the 33rd floor again. The Imperial City PK wasn't over yet. Lao Kui, with all his mad energy, was engaging Crab in a back-and-forth exchange. After carefully observing the situation, Soap whispered instructions to Xiaoqiang and Sherlock. "Leave the two lunatics in the ring to me. Choose one of the remaining two rookies. The other is Xiaoqiang. Fire freely, but try to kill them with one shot. Rookie, fire when you're ready." Hearing Soap's utterly Call of Duty-inspired advice, Sherlock was delighted. It was, after all, a genuine Call of Duty vibe. It reminded Sherlock of those nights spent playing Call of Duty with his friends in the internet cafe. After taking a deep breath, Sherlock placed the red ring of the entire system firmly on Goyle's head, who was standing outside the ring. He held his breath, focused, and gently pulled the trigger. Bang! The subsonic, reduced charge rounds, combined with the silencer, made the sound of the bullets almost imperceptible. Through the scope, Goyle's head jerked back almost a moment Sherlock pulled the trigger. Less than a second after Sherlock pulled the trigger, Soap also pulled the trigger twice. Xiaoqiang also pulled the trigger at the same time, though Xiaoqiang only pulled it once. After 4 consecutive, tiny clicks of bullets, the once bustling arena suddenly quieted. Goyle and Mike collapsed against the ring's guardrails, while old Trey and Crab, inside, fell asleep. Seeing all the enemies fall, Soap quickly stood up without hesitation and rushed to the computer room behind Killian's desk. Sherlock and Xiaoqiang, still vigilantly holding their guns, slowly approached the ring. It must be said that SHIELD products are truly effective. The 4 of them looked like they had fallen asleep, not even a scratch on their bodies. Fearing the extremis virus might be somehow resistant to the anesthetic, Sherlock, after ensuring all 4 were unconscious, shot them several more times. Then, he and Xiaoqiang moved them to the ring, faking a brawl and knocking them unconscious. Fearing the memory-altering anesthetic wouldn't be effective, Sherlock secretly tucked his wand into his sleeve and used memory magic to alter the 4 men's memories. This was Sherlock's first time using memory magic, and it felt magical. It was like editing a video, Sherlock orchestrating a thrilling Japanese drama for the 4. Crab was brutally defeated by Old Kui in the ring, knocking him unconscious. Goyle, enraged, leaped onto the ring to finish off Old Kui. Seeing his best friend knocked unconscious, Mike also jumped onto the ring and engaged Goyle in a brawl. The 2 men were evenly matched, their fists striking each other almost simultaneously, knocking both unconscious. Well, with the soul of a middle school student at its peak, who wouldn't be a passionate young man? Anyway, Sherlock was very satisfied with the plot he arranged. It really had the flavor of a passionate high school. What? Isn't Sherlock unable to use magic? God, is magic such an inconvenient thing? The wand was hidden in the sleeve, and when moving these 4 unlucky guys, didn't he change it? With the help of the sleeve and Xiaoqiang's disguise, the little light of the memory magic didn't leak out at all. No one would discover Sherlock's secret tampering. Everything was so perfect and natural. After completing everything, Sherlock and Xiaoqiang even ran to Killian's refrigerator to get 2 cans of Coke and drank them. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 244 Mission End and Follow-Up. By the time the sun once again shone, Sherlock was already in the tower of his training ground, enjoying an American breakfast with his 5 uncles. The ending of last night's operation was unremarkable. Sherlock, Soap, and Xiaoqiang returned the same way. It's worth mentioning that, having completed their mission, Soap and Xiaoqiang also had some fun. Thanks to Sherlock's magic, which allowed them to shrink in size, the 2 of them experienced a thorough Air Force dogfight in the ventilation duct, except for the lack of actual bullets. Of course, apart from Sherlock's 3-man operation, the only change was that upon returning to the inspection hatch on the 31st floor, the people in the lounge discovered the 4 missing individuals. After a chaotic, all-hands-on-deck operation, the incident was ultimately dismissed as a misunderstanding. Sherlock watched helplessly as a group of guards, chatting and laughing, drove the still fresh 4 individuals back. Well, while a fight leading to simultaneous fainting was a rare occurrence, it wasn't impossible. The 4 men's statements were remarkably consistent under Sherlock's magic, and the other guards had no doubts. However, Crabbe, Goyle, Mike, and Old Tweedy were in for a rough ride. Sherlock personally heard them call the 4 men hot-blooded idiots as they drove them back to rest. Of course, while the mission was successfully completed, it didn't mean the training ground was safe. The AIM building invasion was, at best, a precursor to many other tasks. The real test lay ahead for Sherlock and the others. They had to sift through the vast amount of data to find clues about the AIM laboratory and ultimately deduce its location. After hearing Price's instructions, Sherlock's eyes rolled back, and he nearly died on the spot. Thinking back to the files he'd retrieved from AIM, Sherlock really wanted to grab Price by the collar and ask him if this was even a normal person capable of such a task. Of course, before the massive paperwork began, Price, as the team leader, had to summarize the previous night's operation. Price, a master of the art of giving a good turn, immediately began by giving Sherlock a harsh scolding, while simultaneously praising him for his contributions to the operation, a compliment that made Sherlock roll his eyes. Then, Price shifted gears, stating that while there had been merits and faults, they were largely outweighed, so Sherlock's death sentence was a forgivable one. Using this as an excuse, he shoved a mountain of documents at Sherlock. Sherlock, of course, resisted. Price, Sherlock's parent and the team leader, showed no signs of leniency and gave him a beating. He peppered Sherlock with phrases like "You're the youngest, we're all your parents," leaving Sherlock speechless. For some reason, watching Price's eloquent speech, Sherlock felt he had the potential to be a powerful leader. But who is Sherlock? In his previous life, he was a hard-working laborer. He might not have other skills, but his anti-CPU skill was fully upgraded. Anyone who didn't fully upgrade it would be suffocated by the boss's generous offer. Finally, Price gave up on CPU Sherlock and gave him 2 choices. Either you get kicked out by us and then honestly continue doing your work for no extra charge, or you go to work quietly and honestly. Choose one. Sherlock said, "I have a bad temper, do I need to think about it?" Of course. He honestly took his large amount of documents and found a corner of the conference room to start looking through them. Fortunately, Price was no tyrant and naturally didn't put all the pressure on Sherlock, a junior. He contacted some Black Widows to participate in the data sorting operation. With the participation of the Black Widows, the speed of data sorting and archiving became even faster. The most important attack was directed at the Black Widows. After all, the Red Room was once a vast organization, and just as there were Black Widows handling field operations, there were also Black Widows handling internal affairs. This time, the Black Widows who arrived to provide support were those responsible for internal affairs. Data collation, sifting through vast amounts of data, was their forte. With the added support of Sherlock's energy potion, they were able to work tirelessly, significantly accelerating their processing speed. However, the scene at the scene was truly horrific, almost like a parade of demons. Sherlock himself wasn't much better, his resentment rivaling that of the 996 workers he'd seen working in the AIM building, no, even greater. After all, they were working 24/7. To quickly locate the laboratory, the group largely stayed in the small conference room, except for bathroom breaks. The two Lolita girls took it upon themselves to provide logistical support, providing a constant supply of burgers, coffee, and energy potions. Sherlock was finally released from the meeting room on the morning of the third day. The reason was simple: Tony had called Sherlock. Happy had been attacked and was in the hospital, not in good condition. Tony wanted to ask Sherlock if he had any effective medicine or something. Upon hearing Tony's call, Sherlock immediately declared that he would go to the hospital to see Happy and told Tony not to make any decisions until he arrived. After hanging up, Sherlock explained the situation to Price and rushed out of the meeting room without even a glance back. When Sherlock rushed out of the tower and saw the sun hanging in the sky, he was so excited that tears almost came to his eyes. Sherlock felt only one regret, deep regret. He regretted having taken out a power-up potion. He had been tired from sorting through the documents and thought he'd drink a little to refresh himself, but Price had discovered it. Sherlock hadn't considered hiding it, but he hadn't expected these people to be such lunatics. He was even more ruthless than a ruthless person. Cruel to his enemies, not to himself. Everyone began to work non-stop, fueled by Sherlock's potion. The entire conference room was abuzz with activity. Now that he had a legitimate reason, Sherlock wanted to escape this hellish sweatshop without hesitation. Damn it, the capitalists he'd worked for in his previous life weren't like Price. If this were the former Soviet Union, a boss like Price would be floating above the streetlights. Chapter 245: Happy is attacked. The car sped towards New York Presbyterian Hospital, known as New York City's first People's Hospital, and the entire journey was filled with joy. After all, Sherlock just wanted to escape from that endless place, as far away as possible. Even if Thor used the Rainbow Bridge to summon him to Asgard, Sherlock wouldn't mind calling Thor his righteous husband. However, Sherlock completely ignored the extent of his current status. When Sherlock appeared in Happy's hospital room, exhausted from the journey, he startled everyone there. Even Tony prepared to summon his Mark 42 suit. It wasn't surprising that the people in the ward reacted so strongly. After all, Sherlock's current status was a bit, well, too advanced. There were huge dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was a mess, like a chicken cooperative. Most importantly, there were actually eggs in a bird inside, and they looked alive. His once handsome face now looked drained, gaunt and pale. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say Sherlock was suffering from extreme kidney deficiency. Combined with his scraggly stubble, he looked as if he might collapse on the floor any second. Compared to Happy, who lay in bed, his wounds tended to, Sherlock looked like the one who needed emergency treatment. Inside the ward, Tony and Pepper pondered for a moment before finally concluding that this vacant-looking young man might be their nephew, Sherlock. Sherlock? Is that Sherlock? Pepper asked tentatively, stepping out from behind Tony, who was posing cautiously, after carefully examining the sloppy Sherlock. Upon hearing Pepper's words, Sherlock rolled his eyes at Tony, who was still posing with a look of surprise, and then spoke sullenly. Nonsense, who else could it be but me? Oh, and get some water? Give me some. Tony and Pepper were both taken aback by Sherlock's slightly hoarse, yet strangely familiar, voice. As the saying goes, two people can sleep in the same bed. Pepper and Tony, both in stunned silence, handed Sherlock an unopened bottle of mineral water. Sherlock took it, like a traveler lost in the desert, gulping down the entire bottle in mere seconds. Only after Sherlock had finished did Tony and Pepper finally react. Pepper, true to her end, pulled Sherlock aside, her face etched with concern, questioning him profusely. Sherlock didn't hold back, telling him everything about his mission at AIM and the hellish training camp he'd been leading these past few days. Tony silently gave Sherlock a thumbs up. Of course, Tony was naturally curious. Although he knew Sherlock's current condition was a side effect of the potion, he still wanted to know what attribute could produce such an effect. Sherlock didn't hide anything and directly told Tony the attribute's name, Mr. Emptiness, combined with life pillar, to create his current condition. After all, in the tower conference room right now, Sherlock was definitely the most normal. Didn't you see the two girls standing at the door for a long time every time they entered that conference room, preparing themselves for the moment? Mr. Emptiness was the main culprit for Sherlock's current kidney deficiency, But Sherlock refused to tell Tony about the attribute's effects. After all, revealing them would be a lifelong black mark on Sherlock. However, Sherlock did not hide the life pillar, the bird's nest on his head, and told Tony directly. He even told him about the attribute's interesting effect. The bird's eggs on Sherlock's head had healing properties, tasted delicious, and the number of eggs was limited to 3. Sherlock even gave Tony and Pepper 2 bird eggs as souvenirs, giving them a furious peck from the bird on their heads. Of course, Sherlock forgot about Happy, who was lying in bed. He pried open Happy's mouth and stuffed a raw bird egg into his mouth. The effect was surprisingly good. After the egg entered Happy's mouth, his condition visibly improved, even his eyelids began to tremble. Soon, he slowly opened his eyes, only to be greeted by a bird's nest, dark circles under his eyes, and a face as pale as a 3-day-old grandmother. It was as if Sherlock, who was about to ascend to heaven, was smiling at him. Tony, looking worried and melancholy, was nearby. He lost his breath and passed out again. Tony was so frightened that he frantically called for a doctor. Soon, Happy's ward was filled with the doctors Tony had summoned. But for some reason, even though every doctor stood by Happy's bed, everyone's attention seemed focused on Sherlock, who stood with Tony. For some reason, these doctors felt that the young man standing with Tony Stark was in greater need of emergency care than the fat man lying in bed, both physically and mentally. Sherlock even suspected that if he hadn't been standing with Tony and hadn't shown any signs of abnormality, these doctors would have pounced on him instead of Happy. Sherlock knew from reading the entry that as long as he lay in bed, a doctor would have let out a sharp, angry cry as soon as the medical report came out. If a full-body examination had been ordered, Tony would have not only signed a bunch of critical care forms but also paid for an extra day's stay in the ICU. Compared to the physical conditions that had caused the doctors to let out sharp, furious cries, Sherlock's past, including erectile dysfunction and extreme kidney deficiency, were likely minor issues. Sherlock knew it was just a spell effect, and while it looked scary, it wasn't the kind of situation where he'd have to take a bullet to the face or take a massive hit. He was definitely not in any danger. If I had to describe Sherlock's current state, it was more like that in-game spell where his health was locked down to 1. While it was 1, as long as he didn't actually drain his health bar, Sherlock would be perfectly fine. Even spitting blood in front of a group of doctors was no different. Amidst the sharp cries of the doctors in the ward, Sherlock grabbed Tony and ran without hesitation. They finally made their way to an emergency exit, dodging the doctors who worried Sherlock would die. After watching the doctors disappear down the hallway, Sherlock finally pulled Tony to sit on the stairs. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and looked at Tony with a familiar look. "What do you plan to do next?" After a long pause, Tony, with a troubled expression, cautiously replied to Sherlock. "Well, my dear nephew, you're in a state now. Don't smoke." Chapter 246 Anxious Tony and CPU Master Sherlock. Sherlock stared at Tony for a long time, looking at him like he was a fool. Finally, Tony gave in. Sitting on the steps, Tony's back suddenly bent slightly. As if his energy had been drained away, he casually snatched the cigarette case and lighter from Sherlock's hand, thought for a moment, and then spoke. "Okay, stop staring at me. Honestly, when you asked me what I'm going to do next, I don't know either. I don't even know if the path I'm on is the right one. To others, I'm the handsome, wealthy owner of Stark Group, a complete playboy, a rich second generation who relies on his talent to recklessly play the heroic game. But in reality, I know what I'm really like. During the Battle of New York, I saw aliens far more powerful than us, with technology several times superior to ours. This made me anxious, incredibly anxious. I began to fear that one day, something bad would happen and I would lose my family and loved ones. Sherlock, you know, ever since the Battle of New York, I've been regretting announcing myself to the media as Iron Man. I should have stayed hidden beneath that iron shell. Iron Man without the mask can be anyone, but without it, he can only be Tony Stark. I always feel like I'm not strong enough, and that as an ordinary person, I can't protect those around me. It's the same with Ethan and your parents. Even until now, I still feel like a loser, especially after your store was attacked and Happy fell in front of me. I became even more anxious. Who's next? You? Pepper Potts? Damn it, everyone in the world knows that the only way to get revenge on Iron Man is to find Tony Stark, Tony said as he took out a cigarette from the cigarette case with a trembling hand and put it between his lips. Maybe because his hands were shaking too much, he couldn't successfully light the cigarette after several attempts with a lighter. Sherlock had never seen Tony so fragile. Although he knew that Tony had been suffering from anxiety since the Battle of New York, Sherlock really didn't expect Tony to be anxious to this extent. Frowning, Sherlock reached out and snatched the cigarette and lighter from Tony's hand, saying unhappily, "If you can't smoke, don't. It's a waste, you know? And it's not that good." Tony was practically stunned by Sherlock's sudden action. He'd thought about how Sherlock would comfort him after he'd said that, but he had never expected Sherlock to react like this. Facing Tony's stunned gaze, Sherlock's expression remained one of disgust. He put away his cigarette and lighter before continuing. "Also, Tony, you think too highly of yourself. Remember, you, Tony Stark, are just an ordinary person. No matter how many armors you find, you're still just an ordinary person. Similarly, Black Widow is just an ordinary person, and Hawkeye, who's almost transformed into a nature's child, is just an ordinary person. Even Captain America is, at most, just an ordinary person with some strength. Even I'm just an ordinary person with a little magic. A single bullet is enough to take the lives of all those people I mentioned above. This is no joke." Yet it was just this group of ordinary people who defeated those well-equipped aliens who could travel across the stars. "Tony, have you ever considered why? It's not because you have so many armors with different functions. It's not that everyone's power is like Superman in the comics, who can easily tear apart huge space battleships. It's because of your teammates. Fuck. Why don't you guys like to trust your teammates? What the hell is this bad habit? Captain America is like this, Black Widow is like this, and you are like this too. Listen, Tony. I know you've been taught about personal heroism since childhood, believing that there are some things you should handle on your own. Face all difficulties and enemies like a hero. But the power of an individual is always limited. You still have a team. You still have teammates. You still have us. When you can't handle something, it's not embarrassing to ask others for help. Those who mock you will be your enemies. Your friends and teammates will only lend you a hand and give you the greatest help they can. Although it is not ruled out that some bad friends, such as me, will madly mock you after your troubles are over, but I will definitely help you solve your troubles sincerely. Also, even if a few of us ordinary people really can't handle your so-called big troubles. Thor, is the green fat man just going to watch helplessly from the side? I really don't understand what you are thinking. Listen, Tony, if it weren't for your armor, you would become Iron Man. If you really don't have your omnipotent and versatile armor, you are nothing. Then you should never have it. Iron Man is not because of your armor, but because you are Tony Stark. FXXK. Don't carry everything on your shoulders, Sherlock babbled at Tony, leaving him stunned for a moment. After a moment, Tony, who had been feeling down, suddenly burst out laughing, quickly regaining his radiant Iron Man demeanor. He stood up, patted Sherlock on the shoulder, and said with a grin, "Ha, you, a junior, are actually lecturing me. God, it sounds like something my dad would say." At Tony's teasing, Sherlock finally couldn't help but roll his eyes, seeming to disdain Tony completely. Honestly, Sherlock had been a bit angry just now, and his barrage at Tony was a way of getting his point across. Most importantly, Sherlock had always done this. Whether it was the Red Room or Captain vs. SHIELD, Sherlock had almost always called in everyone he could. But honestly, Sherlock's words had put Tony in a much better mood. At least he wasn't as anxious and scared as he had been at the beginning. It's just like that. The more something weighs on your mind, the harder it becomes to let go, ultimately drowning you in constant anxiety and self-destruction. But at the same time, once you've spoken about something, no matter what the other person's reaction, you'll feel a sense of relief. Seeing Sherlock looking at him with a seemingly hopeless expression, Tony didn't seem to mind. After a moment's thought, he pulled a tablet from his pocket and handed it to Sherlock. "You mentioned Killian's name the other day. I went back and looked, but I can't remember how I offended him. But it doesn't matter. While you have a point, this is still my war. As a participant, I want to end it myself. The tablet contains the records I exported from Unit 01 and Unit 02. I hope they'll be of some use to you." With that, Tony was about to leave, but as if remembering something, he turned to Sherlock, frowning sternly. "A word of caution, Sherlock. Based on my reconstruction of the scene, it seems two people entered your shop that day, one after the other. But both of them possessed the same ability. You must question your own safety. 3000 degrees Celsius is enough to vaporize many things. And you, Sherlock, are my only blood relative in this world." Hearing Tony's words, Sherlock was stunned. He took the tablet from Tony's hand, a bit unresponsive. Then, remembering that he still had to warn Tony about the attack on his villa, he quickly grabbed Tony's arm as he was about to leave. "Listen, Tony. What I'm about to say is crucial. Never, ever, ever, ever leak any information about yourself again. Iron Man is Tony, and it's already caused you so much trouble." Looking at Sherlock's earnest and respectful expression, Tony instantly thought of Sherlock's fabricated prophetic powers. He frowned and nodded, then turned and continued walking out into the hallway. Just as Tony was about to push open the fire door, Sherlock's voice echoed from behind him. "Also, this is not your war, but our war. Killian will die in my hands, and even Jesus can't stop him." I said it. After hearing Sherlock's words, Tony rarely smiled, said no way, pushed open the door and quickly disappeared from Sherlock's sight. Chapter 247 The Legend of the Miracle Dr. Sherlock. Sherlock had told Tony everything he needed to know, and seeing Tony return to Happy's ward, Sherlock had no intention of staying any longer. After all, Sherlock's current appearance was quite unusual in this hospital setting. Sherlock was genuinely terrified of being caught by the responsible doctors and bound and sent to the lab. Sherlock himself was a bit unsure of his current state. He knew he would end up intubated the next day, and then, the next day, the effects of his condition would wear off, and Sherlock would be fine. Then, maybe it would be another medical miracle, the result of repeated research by those responsible yet crazy doctors, churning out dozens of papers. Sherlock wasn't worried about the papers, but he wanted to avoid misleading others. After all, Sherlock's condition was still magical, completely different from science like medicine. That said, Sherlock didn't know that Pepper had already told the doctors during their conversation with Tony that he had just fed Happy the bird's egg from the top of his head, drawing gasps of amazement from the doctors present. It's no wonder the doctors were so frantic. After all, who had ever seen a patient's recovery significantly improved after being fed a raw egg? Honestly, they hadn't. In fact, because of the bird's egg, Happy, who was supposed to have been in a coma and still in critical condition, suddenly woke up. As for the critical period, under the X-rays, it was as if it hadn't even existed. His overall recovery speed was even 3 or 4 times faster than a normal person's. To put it bluntly, before the bird's egg, Happy was an average, overweight adult. But after being fed the bird's egg, he was like someone who drank the red potion in a game. To put it in a more naive way, the doctors felt a constant flow of vitality within Happy's body. This immediately led to Tony being surrounded by the doctors upon his return to the ward, who began to pepper him with questions. Some asked if it was Stark Group's latest miracle drug, others wondered if it was some kind of miracle. Some, even more exaggerated, knelt before Tony, begging him to save his patient. Tony was left with a tangle of questions. After finally understanding the entire situation from these frantic doctors, he was left with a sullen expression. Damn. His good nephew had just lectured him, and now he'd left him with this mess? He hadn't considered that he had summoned these doctors in such a hurry. For some reason, Sherlock's words suddenly flashed through Tony's mind. While there are some bad guys like me who might mock you once your troubles are over, I will absolutely and sincerely help you resolve them. Tony instantly made up his mind, and without hesitation, he began to deceive the doctors. Tony spouted nonsense about miracle cures and the blessing of the goddess of life. He even claimed that this miraculous pharmacist only treated cases incurable by modern medicine. If it weren't for his close relationship with him, he wouldn't have been able to call such a master. He also demanded confidentiality from the doctors. The lighthouse itself was magical, and the gender was a bit of a myth, but this was clearly a scam, and yet these highly educated doctors actually believed it. After all, Happy's living example was there, so they couldn't help but be convinced. They began asking how to contact Sherlock. Tony, realizing that his boasts had already been spread. Did it matter if Sherlock could actually treat terminal illnesses beyond the reach of modern medicine? He still had to offer hope to those desperate patients. After a moment's deliberation, he finally revealed Sherlock's home address, repeatedly reminding the doctors that it had to be for patients untreatable by modern medicine. Otherwise, too many people would be sent there, or the patients would hurt the master's feelings, and then he would move on and be impossible to find again. Sherlock never imagined that his good Uncle Tony would leave him a mysterious legend within the hospital. Nor could Tony have imagined that his initial prank on Sherlock's boasts would become a legendary secret among the hospital's top doctors. Whenever they encountered a truly incurable patient, they would secretly share Sherlock's home address. As a result, Sherlock's family would eventually become the Los Angeles branch of Camartage and its largest source of students in North America. Of course, all this is a story for later. Now, Sherlock, disguised as a celebrity seeking a secret abortion, slipped out of the hospital and hid in his car. Going home was impossible. After all, his home was now a concentration camp for the criminals, a meeting room filled with demons. Sherlock had no desire to return after leaving. But Sherlock had nowhere else to go. After much deliberation, he decided to find a place where Price couldn't find him and get some sleep. Without hesitation, Sherlock ran to Tony's villa, found his guest room, showered, and flung himself onto the soft bed. An hour later, Sherlock sat up angrily and threw his pillow to the ground. He angrily dressed, climbed back into his car, and sped home. What? Why didn't Sherlock take this opportunity to rest? Haha, rest? Even with the effects of the boost potion, Sherlock felt exhausted, but he just couldn't fall asleep. He tossed and turned in bed for an hour, but couldn't fall asleep. Not only could he not sleep, but during that hour, Sherlock's wandering thoughts had even revealed two pieces of information he'd overlooked while sorting through his files. Growing increasingly angry, Sherlock sat up and drove home. Isn't it just that? In my previous life, I was so obsessed with school and then the workplace. Damn it, even after I was born, I've been obsessed with milk. Damn it, how could I, a seasoned test taker, be crushed by a bunch of you locals who haven't experienced the college entrance exams and the workplace of a giant Eastern nation? Damn it, come on, who's afraid of who? If you can't crush me, I'll crush you all today. No one's going to live. Get the hell with you. Well, let's just say, work doesn't drive you crazy. Sherlock is clearly in the late stages of his illness. Chapter 248, The Battle of the Kings. He drove furiously back to his training grounds at lightning speed, and without stopping, he rushed into the chaotic conference room. Sherlock was even prepared for the smoke-filled scene inside, a scene resembling a night parade of demons. But what Sherlock didn't expect was that when he flung open the door, he was greeted by a deserted room. A wide table was strewn with various documents, some useless documents had even been thrown to the floor. The coffee on the table was still steaming. Everything was exactly as it had been when Sherlock had left. The only, and biggest, difference was that a group of demons and monsters in the conference room had disappeared. That's right, the entire room was completely empty, as if those people had vanished into thin air. Perhaps due to the long period of lack of rest, Sherlock's mind was already fading. His first reaction was to wonder what AIM had done to make all these killers in his family vanish out of thin air. But logic quickly disproved this theory. After all, there had been no signs of fighting along the way. After all, even the mighty AIM couldn't possibly make their own incredibly skilled team vanish in an instant, could they? If they were capable of such a feat, why would Killian resort to such backroom tactics? He could simply launch a massive assassination, making anyone who objected disappear. Would that be the end of the world? Why would such a hassle be necessary? Even so, Sherlock couldn't understand how a meeting could vanish without a trace in the space of an hour. Confused, Sherlock turned and began to wander the tower, trying to find his teammates who had gotten him into such a predicament. Sherlock didn't catch any of them, but he did find a young girl named Lorna in the hallway, carrying a large bag of hamburgers. When Price, Sherlock, and the Black Widows began their intelligence-gathering mission, Lorna and Mindy took it upon themselves to shoulder the logistical responsibilities. While they weren't as sleepless and drug-fueled as the wolf exterminators in the conference room, the intense work still wore them out. They even had to work shifts later in the day. Lorna's face was visibly exhausted. For the first time in her limited career, she witnessed a frenzy of adult work. Honestly, Mindy and Lorna were already a bit stressed. The adult workplace was truly terrifying. When Sherlock pressed her, Lorna offered Sherlock the information he needed in exchange for helping her deliver a large bag of hamburgers to the conference room. Sherlock didn't hesitate. With a wave of his wand, the hamburgers lined up and headed towards the conference room, before Lorna's envious gaze. Seeing her payment, Lorna no longer hesitated to tell Sherlock the truth. It turned out that shortly after Sherlock left, Price and Black Widow, the other spinsters, finally couldn't take it anymore. Sherlock, the spinster in their eyes, finally left the damn meeting room. They all stood up and asked for a break. After all, fighting in battle had never been so tiring. And looking at the appearance of everyone in the room now, those who had a human form were lucky. One Black Widow had even transformed into a tentacle monster, with only a human head and nothing but tentacles. Price hadn't expected things to turn out this way. He had originally planned to work a 996 schedule, but Sherlock hadn't expected him to pull out something as adorable as the boosting potion, and if Sherlock, the youngest of the generation, was already working the potion, how could the uncles, aunts, sisters, and brothers dare to say they couldn't take it anymore and needed a break? That was out of the question. And so, a strange internal conflict had inexplicably begun, triggered by Sherlock's unintentional action. Sherlock looked at this group of uncles, aunts, brothers, and sisters and felt that they were all wolves, working their asses off without a break. They were ruthless people. If they stopped working, they would inevitably be punished by Price, so they started working hard too. But these uncles, aunts, brothers, and sisters saw Sherlock as the complete opposite. My goodness, this guy is a complete devil. Whether he was in the Red Room or in the army, he could at least rest, but now he has met a king of work. This youngest one is working so hard, how can we old guys and seniors not work hard and still have the face to get by? The whole meeting room began to become more and more anxious under this strange misunderstanding. Sherlock hoped that these senior leaders would speak up and stop this internal competition. These senior leaders also looked at Sherlock eagerly, hoping that this king of work would quickly put down his work and take a break, so that everyone could take a break. So, less than 10 minutes after Sherlock received Tony's call and left, Price waved his hand and the group of wolf-killing Royal Kings, whom Sherlock considered to be wolf-killing Royal Kings, all ran off to rest. They showered and slept, sincerely hoping that Sherlock, the little devil, wouldn't return too soon. After learning the whole story from Lorna, Sherlock chuckled coldly and walked towards the meeting room without looking back. Damn it, you still think I'm a Royal King? I still think you're Royal Kings. Since you say I'm a Royal King, let me show you what it's like to be a true Royal King, a veteran from a great eastern country. What? Since Sherlock is already going to participate in a Royal King championship, why doesn't he call everyone back to work? Haha, that really underestimates Sherlock's potion. You know, while Sherlock's potion has serious side effects, its effectiveness is also truly amazing. Sherlock, who has been playing magic for years, can't sleep. If those muggles who are experiencing magic for the first time can sleep, they will be shocked. Sure enough, not long after Sherlock started to organize the information in his hand in the office, Price's Squidward version walked into the office door with a cup of coffee and a look of despair on his face. Yes, you read that right, it's Squidward, exactly the same as the Squidward in SpongeBob SquarePants. Even because of this internal conflict, even his expression is exactly the same as the Squidward in the animation. How to say it, Squidward wearing Price's clothes is still very interesting, isn't it? Chapter 249 Bikini Bottom Special Forces. That's right, Price's entry actually transformed him into Squidward. As Price entered the meeting room with Squidward's signature shuffling sound effects, Sherlock was trying hard to stifle his laughter. After all, Price's appearance was already quite comical. Squidward's characteristically large nose drooped down to Price's mouth, and combined with Price's already presumably caterpillar-like beard, it formed a bizarre, cross-like image. His face wasn't the only thing, but Price's outfit was hilarious too. Can you imagine Squidward wearing a Special Forces uniform topped with a camouflage bucket hat? The funniest part was that Price's demeanor, thanks to his long hours of intelligence gathering, was incredibly similar to Squidward's. Especially the octopus tentacle holding the coffee cup, it made Sherlock laugh every time he saw it. The animation gave the impression that Squidward was being pretentious, holding the coffee cup between two fingers, but we were wrong. Price demonstrated that if you didn't hold the coffee cup this way, you wouldn't be able to lift it, unless you're afraid of turning into a sizzling octopus trying to hold a scalding cup. Price noticed Sherlock chuckling nearby, but exhausted, he ignored her. He used the suction cups on his arm-like tentacle to pick up a file and began reading. You'd have to say, these tentacle-like tentacles are quite useful for reading, they can't be shaken off. Sherlock thought this was the limit of his potion's power, but he never expected something even more surprising. Shortly after Zhang Price's fish brother entered, The other members of Team 141 also entered the meeting room with dejected expressions. There was Haizile Okyang and Cotton Baby. There was Pie Soap and Big Star. And most surprising of all, there were two unexpected characters, Sangosgi and Crab Ghost Boss. Sherlock burst out laughing the moment the two entered. It's no wonder Sherlock was so surprised. After all, their styles were so bizarre. As everyone knows, Sandy the Squirrel is supposedly a female squirrel. Although Sandy's costume wasn't restored this time due to the potion, who could have imagined that Gates, a battle-hardened man with computer skills, a knack for fighting, and a penchant for using a sniper in close combat, would speak in Sandy's hilarious female voice? And Ghost, for that matter, was even more impressive. Sherlock would have laughed at Ghost forever. After all, Ghost had transformed into Mr. Krabs due to the potion, but Ghost had always worn his skull mask. The result was that Mr. Krabs's two long eyes were poking out from the eye sockets of Ghost's skull mask. It would have been fine if the eyes had just poked out, but Mr. Krabs' nose, which looked like a spike, actually protruded from the nostrils on Ghost's mask. Even Mr. Krabs's mouth inexplicably matched Ghost's skull mask. It was as if they were custom-made for him. Crucially, the potion had also imbued the Ghost with Mr. Krabs's gait. Sherlock swore it was the first time in his life he'd seen the taciturn Ghost's legs move so quickly. A first. What the hell, a limited-time collaboration between Team 141 and Bikini Bottom. The more Sherlock thought about it, the more amused he became, his laughter growing louder. After all, when Sherlock left, there was only Price's Squidward. How come less than 3 hours after he'd quietly left, Bikini Bottom had moved to Sherlock's training ground? Sherlock could laugh all he wanted. But in the insular world of intelligence processing, the bizarre side effects of Sherlock's potion were the only entertainment. It even got to the point where every time someone drank the potion, a group would gather to scrutinize the bizarre side effects. But Sherlock, still not satisfied with his laughter, quipped, "Oh, who's living in a giant pineapple in the deep sea?" Though his voice wasn't loud, it was important to remember that Sherlock and the Bikini Bottom team were the only people in the conference room at the moment. Sherlock's snarling voice successfully triggered the wrath of his 5 uncles. Without further ado, they surrounded Sherlock, with Zhang Price Fish glaring at him fiercely and demanding, "What were you just singing? What were you just singing?" Normally, Sherlock would have simply pinched him, his quail-like form trembling and afraid to say anything. But now, facing the Bikini Bottom 5 surrounding him, Sherlock felt no fear. He even boldly repeated his words. "Oh, who lives in a giant pineapple in the deep sea?" Sponge, before Sherlock could utter the word baby, Zia Okyang, transformed into SpongeBob SquarePants, struck Sherlock on the head with a knife. But since he was SpongeBob, Sherlock didn't feel the pain, instead bursting into laughter. Seeing Sherlock's laughter grow increasingly arrogant, Zhang Price Fish Brother could no longer contain his rage and waved his tentacles. "Brothers, beat them up." The 5 Bikini Bottom warriors surrounded Sherlock and began to kick him frantically, but was it any use? Anyway, Sherlock remained in a crouched position with his hands on his head, laughing as he took the beating, occasionally breaking into a few lines of the SpongeBob SquarePants theme song. The more they were beaten, the more furious they became. Finally, Soap even started shouting out his moves. "Look at my fisherman karate," and Sherlock, the one being beaten, even had the nerve to find fault. "Ho ha ho 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 ha ho ha, you've strayed from the stage, you fake Patrick. That's a move from One Piece." Ha ho ha ho ha. Attracted by the noise from the conference room, the grotesque Black Widows pushed open the door to see the Bikini Bottom task force beating up a hollow man with a bird's nest on his head. Some were shattered, while others were thrilled. After all, the animation SpongeBob SquarePants can be said to be a phenomenon. Many adults around the world also like to watch this cartoon that makes people catch their horses. The Black Widows recruited by Sherlock are naturally no exception. After beating him for a long time, the 5 people found that it was of no use. Instead, they were exhausted and panting. They all glared at Sherlock, who was still squatting on the bed and laughing, and decided to deal with it later. When he looked up, he found that the whole conference room was surrounded by a large circle of strange-looking Black Widows. Some people even took out their mobile phones and looked at the 5 people with gleaming eyes, as if they were seeing idols. Chapter 250 Copyright Battle. After a flurry of activity, the conference room finally returned to its usual busy state. The Bikini Bottom task force watched with a lingering fear as the Black Widows resumed their work. It was truly terrifying to see the frenzy of anime fans. The 5 of them felt like they'd taken their entire group photo today. Sherlock, driven by his enthusiasm, was once again swirling around, even more so than before. After all, this time, Sherlock was determined to outdo everyone. He even used magic to assist in organizing documents, maximizing his efficiency. Even Sherlock himself occasionally wondered if he had this energy before his time travel. In the workplace, he'd surely receive a promotion and a raise, become general manager, become CEO, marry a beautiful woman, and reach the pinnacle of life. Even beyond the workplace, in terms of academics, he'd be a surefire success in the civil service exam and a guaranteed admission to the postgraduate entrance exam. If it were earlier, before the Gaokeo, he'd score 749 out of a possible 750, allowing him to choose any university nationwide. Faced with Sherlock's "if I can't kill him, I'll kill you all," these uncles, aunts, brothers, and sisters, all older than Sherlock, were practically unbearable. After all, Sherlock wasn't alone. He'd even supervise you and join him. Laziness was impossible. Under his magic, he didn't even need to get up to pour his coffee. If his cup ran out of coffee, he'd jump off the table, grab the coffee machine, and then return. Even the pile of unorganized documents seemed to have grown legs. As soon as you finished one, the next one would zip right over to you. Apart from going to the bathroom, there was no time to rest. This situation continued until noon the next day, when everyone finally got free. The reason for their release was simple: one unlucky person had drawn the entry for a clone. Looking at the room full of Patrick, Sherlock couldn't help but feel a little worried as he left the meeting room. After all, everyone knew how smart Patrick was, even though he was made of soap. Sherlock was truly terrified that when he returned, he'd find not the organized intelligence but a room full of shredded paper and a scene of Patrick stars partying. Beyond that, Sherlock was also worried about these temporarily liberated individuals. Over the course of the day, the entries from the potion dispenser were like discovering a new world, with all sorts of anime characters beginning to appear in droves. They now gathered the entire cast of characters from The Simpsons, Rick and Morty, Futurama, and Family Guy, a truly epic anime character parade. Even Sherlock himself wasn't immune to this curse, transformed into Hamo, the iconic anime character with only 3 hairs on his head and weighing nearly 300 pounds. The scene truly terrified Sherlock. In his entire 2 lifetimes, it was the first time Sherlock had ever seen a shirt button fly off like a bullet, the first time he'd ever heard the loud noise of a belt snapping, and the first time he'd ever known the feeling of clothes ripping apart on his body. However, Sherlock did understand a little bit why Hamo was typically depicted in anime wearing a white shirt and jeans. Because at the lighthouse, the easiest clothing for Hamo's size was a white shirt and jeans. This was pointed out to Sherlock by the 2 young ladies who had been assigned to buy clothes. Of course, with the random entries. Sherlock wasn't the only one who was amazed. Everyone in the conference room, including the young ladies, was also amazed. A prime example was Black Widow, who unexpectedly drew the same entry as Sherlock, except Sherlock was Hamo, while the unlucky Black Widow was Maggie. Have you ever seen a 1-meter-tall, skyrocket-style bun? Well, Sherlock and everyone in the conference room had, and it was purple. Even Sherlock was curious about her own 1-meter-tall, skyrocket-style bun, repeatedly digging around in it. As for characters like the Robot Bender and the Grandpa, Black Widow, transformed into Bender, experienced a feeling of stuffing herself for the first time. And in her Grandpa form, Black Widow immediately swapped her coffee for a shot of liquor. In short, the entire meeting, even before Soap's Patrick Star took over, had already begun devolving from a chaotic riot into copyright war. Oh, and by the way, let me just say that Ben's butt is truly shiny. To say it could be used as a mirror is an understatement. Sherlock tested it with magic, and the result was absolutely smooth. Can you believe it? Of course, that wasn't the most outrageous thing. The most outrageous thing was that a small group of Black Widows, thanks to Sherlock's potion, had become the subordinates of North America's greatest copyright tycoon. Looking at those 2 mice, 2 ducks, 2 dogs, and a fox, not only Sherlock, but even Price felt a little shaky. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given everyone a break as soon as Soap was able to spill it himself. After all, are you kidding me about North America's strongest legal department? If someone discovered a bunch of copyrighted products, it would either be a lawsuit to the death, or these people would immediately sell themselves to the other party, live in a luxurious castle, and become spokespersons without the puppet costumes. Crucially, the spokesperson's contract only lasted 24 hours, after which it would be endless working to pay off the debt. Just thinking about the lawsuit was terrifying enough. Price truly felt that if he didn't call a halt, whether or not anyone would be able to collect was another matter, especially with a room full of copyright holders, who would be truly speechless. Aside from the group of people who had had a blast and couldn't leave the house at that moment, the two Lolita girls were probably the happiest in this situation. After all, they were still young and adored anime. The characters they'd seen now came alive before their very eyes, and the Lolita girls were happier than going to an amusement park. A shift change? What shift? No one can stop me from chasing stars. Even the Hasselblad DSLR Sherlock had bought for his collection at the beginning of his time travel, fueled by his sudden wealth, was commandeered by the Lolita girls. In just a day and a half, they'd taken over 10 gigabytes of photos. That guy had a plethora of group photos, personal photos, and work photos, and Sherlock was amazed. No wonder these two lawless were not in such a good mood when I took them to the comic convention. It seems that the cosplay was wrong. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.